Hey, what's going on, everybody? How you doing tonight? My Spotify just like froze on me. That was weird. Trying to turn the volume down and it just like froze for a second. Strange. Never had that happen. How you guys doing? What's going on? Thank you for coming through. Gonna watch some videos for a bit, maybe do some other things. How you doing? Going on? I have a few videos to check out. I don't know where to start exactly. You guys are doing good. There's like some new assassin rapper story that looks really weird. It's called Entrance or Entrance. I'm not sure which one. I'm gonna check it out. What's going on? Also, Kaithulu, thank you for that resub. Appreciate that. How's it going? Let's do a little Jeff TV for a bit. In a few days. Like I said, there's a new assassin rapper video that looked weird. I want to watch. Hold on a second. Pavlovian response triggered.
The boys in homeroom were talking about it.
Whoa.
They were like the Hardy Boys, but there were three of them.
Her audio is
They were
not
always
good.
talking about some adventure they just had.
Like
They had even invited me a few times, but I was always too chicken. One
static
time
in the
they jumped the
background.
fence at the quarry. Another time they went to the old abandoned mall
Sounds like
near
we're
the
playing
sealed off
fucking
freeway that
Project
no one used
Zomboid.
anymore. This time they were talking about a cave.
Yeah, his videos are great.
It wasn't far from my house, at least that's what Miles said. It was in the woods behind my
The
backyard,
Hardly Boys.
about a half-mile
That's
down.
not what she said. Is it really?
But it wasn't the cave they were talking about. Well, it was and it wasn't. See, Miles said he had heard something there, and he couldn't stop thinking about it.
No.
He said a voice was calling him to go inside.
No.
The others thought maybe they heard something, but they couldn't be sure.
They didn't say
Miles
that.
wanted to go in, but the others said no.
Oh,
And
that's
as
what
much
that's
as
from.
they
Okay.
wanted to, they just hadn't come prepared.
I forgot. I
Mickey
was
said
like,
that it
is
looks
familiar,
like
but
you'd
it's not.
easily get lost because it was so dark. But tonight they'd bring flashlights and one of the big, long dock line ropes Chris's dad had down at the boatyard. It was sturdy, and if they tied it to something outside the cave, it'd keep them from getting lost in there. They invited me. When
Why
I
are
said
they going
yes,
in the
they all
cave?
froze. You're going in first, then, Mickey said. That dumb, freckled smile and greaser hair always made me want to punch him.
Jeez.
We all met up that night by my house around midnight. I followed them as they walked single file straight through the woods. It was easy enough to find the cave.
Yeah,
Half
it's
mile
different.
down, just like
I hope
Miles
he gets
said.
a cameo in it, though. They find him
It
in the
looked
cave,
like
and
a
he's like,
big
yo,
open mouth,
it's the assassin
black
rapper.
inside and totally hollow.
And they, like, get scared and
There's
run away.
someone in there, Miles told me. I stared at it, with the others expecting me to go in first.
Yo, I'm in here rapping.
He said he wasn't trying to scare me, but
Shit's
he knew
getting
it was true.
poppin'.
There was something in there. He had heard it himself. I nearly peed my pants just looking at it. I told them I
He
couldn't
doesn't
do it.
cameo in his own video. Why wouldn't he? It's his video.
They laughed. Then Mickey tied the rope to a tree outside and told me to wait for them.
Okay,
He
that
said
is,
if they hadn't come back in an hour, I should tell someone. So I sat there and guarded the rope. At first it went taut because they used it to help them go down the initial slope just past the mouth of the cave. Just after a minute or so, the rope went slack, and they called to me saying that they were going a bit deeper.
Oh, fuck.
I said okay, and I sat there in the woods. That was the
It looks
scariest
like a
night of my
Warcraft 3
life.
gold mine.
Normally,
It's just
the
like a
woods
fucking
would be the
mound.
scariest part. I didn't even like looking at them from my bedroom window at night. Something about them always felt sinister,
Yeah, don't go
even
in
during the
caves.
day, to be honest.
What are you doing?
They never felt like nature usually does. But this time, it wasn't the towering trees or the whispering of the wind slithering through the leaves that terrified me. This time, It was the cave.
The cave itself.
From where I sat, it was just a wide opening with darkness so thick it could even be a curtain.
The night is gonna...
Someone could have been standing there staring at me, and I would have never known it. The sun woke me up.
She has a nice voice. The
dawn.
Microphone has like some weird feedback on.
It had been 5 hours since they went into the cave. I moved to the entryway and screamed, but there was no answer.
Crusty.
I told my mom everything, and she called the police.
The police bang their heads
Policemen
together.
could hardly fit in the tunnels past the slope.
I don't know, boss. We can't get in the tunnel.
They tried everything they could.
We tried everything, and we had given up.
2 weeks later, the search was called off. I had nightmares pretty much every night for a year after that. On days I couldn't sleep, I would sit up, looking at the woods behind my house, waiting for them to come walking out. They never did, of course.
Dig it up.
I never heard a single thing about them. Some people even tried going into the caves to look for anything they could find, but they all said it was just too tight to get anywhere after the slope near the opening. My senior year, people were finally starting to forget. It was almost like it was an urban legend, like it hadn't really happened.
Feels smoother than usual.
I was okay with that. I wanted to forget. One night, I woke up to a knocking at my front door.
Not an assassin.
It was still the middle of the night. I was so groggy, I wasn't sure I was even really awake or not.
Oh, they came back.
I followed the sound of the knocking all the way downstairs and opened the door.
Rap tap tapping, nevermore.
But there was no one there. Then I heard the knocking again.
It just has like a bad bit rate
from
to
behind me, from the basement door. Now I was sure I was awake. And I was scared. Every few seconds, it would come again.
What?
Knock, knock, knock.
How would they knock on the door that you're standing?
I was scared to open
confused.
But I was frozen there, too afraid to run.
You're talking about another door?
So I opened the door. Miles was walking down the stairs already.
What?
The light in the basement was off, so he was just barely visible. He turned back and looked at me. "You have to come to the cave," he said. "We're still down there." He turned to go back down. Just before he did, his eyes glistened yellow in the half-light. He walked into the dark and vanished. I tried to convince myself that it had been a dream, but something inside wouldn't let me believe it. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it.
He's there.
What if it was true? What if they were still down there? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mouth of the cave, just like that night. I felt like all it wanted was for me to go inside. I kept thinking about the tunnels. What if there was one right beneath me as I saw in class? What if all 3 boys were only a few feet away from me, right beneath the surface? It would have been the easiest thing, just staying put, keeping to the surface. The risk was all below. Just knowing it was there, knowing I would never have an answer to what happened to those guys unless I went in.
I kind of feel like this story was overhyped.
One day,
I thought we were going
when it
for
was
something
still light out,
insane.
with nothing but a flashlight in hand.
They went in a hole?
I figured I'd just cross the threshold, look around for a second, and come back up.
Oh shit.
Maybe the pulling, the incessant thinking about it,
maybe it'll be like
finally
Hollow Earth.
Stop if I just went inside, just for a second. When I got there, it wasn't so scary. So I walked inside.
It wasn't that scary.
The cave was wide, wider than I would have thought. It sloped down so that just after you had gone in, you were already too deep to see the opening behind you unless you looked up. which I did. The cave stretched on beneath
'Cause
me.
I'm in too deep.
It was steep, but not so much that it caused much concern.
And I'm just trying to
I figured if I was really desperate, I could climb back up pretty easily. So I slid down, following the beam of my light, down and down the wide open cave. Finally,
I'm going under.
I came to the edge of the slope. There was a drop, only about 7 feet down. I aimed my light. It seemed like a flat platform and a way to keep going straight. I could only see a foot or two into the corridor. The walls were full of rocks that stuck out. I could climb up if I wanted, so I sat on the ledge and pushed myself off, landing on the platform.
Why?
Hello? I called at the edge of the corridor. My voice carried, bouncing off the walls and fading into the dark.
Hello?
The feeling that had brought me here didn't dissipate as I moved deeper into the cave. It was just the opposite. The feeling got more and more intense, like I was always right on the edge of finding out the mysteries of the cave. So I went into the corridor. It wasn't super wide, but not too narrow either. I had to turn to walk sideways and fit comfortably, but that was okay. Behind me, the light from outside was starting to fade. In front, there was only the yellow beam of my flashlight bounding against the rock, which got sharper and sharper as I walked on. By the time I reached the end of the corridor,
just have, like, perfect right
they
angles.
were sharp as knives. There was another slight slope down. Beyond that, I wasn't sure.
It's made out of, like...
My light couldn't reach. I slid down, but the slope was so smooth I almost slipped and fell. At the bottom, I turned my light back and saw the slope was just as big as the first one. Only it was steeper, and there was nothing to hold on to. I tried climbing back up, but even as I did, I knew there was no turning back. And as much as I wanted to leave, I still felt like it wasn't done. Just a little further, I thought. I was almost there.
Just almost there. I'm almost there!
The tunnel ahead wasn't wide like the first.
Yeah, we're thank you for that resub,
In
dude.
fact, it was exactly as wide
Howdy
as I was.
as well.
I pushed in, both my arms grazing the sides.
How come the
Each
rescue
step
people
was
couldn't
tighter
find
than the
this?
last. And worse yet, it was always going down.
Hmm?
I realized that ever since I had entered the cave, I had been steadily moving deeper underground, always going down. I must have gone at least a quarter of a mile
always
by now.
deeper.
There was no turning back. I just had to hope I would find something that the other boys didn't. The beam of my flashlight grew dim, but there wasn't much to see anyway because it got so thin ahead. The ceiling of the cave wall dipped down and my only option became simply to go with it, until it got so thin that I was on my stomach. There wasn't enough room to pull myself forward by my arms, so I had to belly crawl 1 inch at a time. My right arm was fully extended out in front of me, the flashlight shaking as I moved. And still the ground sloped down, always deeper.
What?
Every
Looks like
moment
she's,
that
like, in a
passed, I
box
was
now.
farther from the
The
surface.
story is a fucking insane adventure.
I thought the cave would have some logic to its passages, but I was wrong. There was no rhyme or reason for why the
There's
tunnels
no
would turn
rhyme
right,
or reason.
where the ground would suddenly give way. And yet, no matter how narrow or awkward, there was always enough room for me to pass through. Like it had been made for human bodies to inhabit it. Made by something beyond comprehension.
This story
And
is
then,
weird.
Just as my light was beginning
I
to
was not
truly
expecting
die out,
this.
the narrow passageway I had to push and struggle through, ripping my clothes and tearing my skin, finally opened up. I was elated. My lungs could fill again without the pain of jagged rocks scraping my ribs. But the feeling didn't last. There was nothing ahead. No passage. But there was something below. Water. Black.
Water.
Nearly invisible. I stepped in it, thinking it was a puddle. My foot sank down to my shins before I caught myself on the edge.
What the
First,
fuck?
I tried to go back the way I came.
These
but the protruding rocks
lights
cut into
look
my
like
stomach.
balls down there.
They all faced toward me so that when I was moving toward them, they only scraped my skin, but
She changed clothing.
now if I moved the other way,
Good
they would
question. I
rip
don't know
into
what
me.
happened.
There was no going back. I could stand here in the little pocket and die, or I could drop into that black hole in the ground and risk not only being stuck, but drowning at the same time. The water bubbled, and I wondered if there was something beneath the surface.
What?
Something that had called me here. Called Miles here all that time ago. But then another thought struck me. This one
You
was
had a
so
clipper.
horrible, I wished I could have taken it back as soon as I had it.
It's just a completely different person.
The mouth of the cave.
Maybe that's just the magic of the cave.
The long, twisting tunnels. The warmth of it against my skin. It all felt so alive. What if it was? What if Miles hadn't been called by something in the cave, but by the cave itself? What if the water moves because it was still digesting their bones?
No.
My light finally went out, and I was left with nothing but a darkness so absolute, it too felt alive. Like there was someone standing so close to me. I couldn't see anything at all. Yellow eyes stared up from the black pool beneath me.
They went away.
They quickly sank into the depths. I stood there, frozen and trembling, my mind reeling. Had I really seen them? I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe an hour, maybe 5. My joints were locking up and the silence around me began to sound like voices. I would move and my feet would scrape the ground and I would realize just how quiet it had really been. The dread of my situation began to set in, and I made my decision.
I thought there was going to be like some goblins.
I would
maybe.
dive into the black pool. There was no other way.
Down, down, the goblin. Down.
I closed my eyes, which had already filled with tears, and I took a deep breath. I jumped inside. As soon as I did, I knew there was no coming back up the same way. The tunnel was about 5 feet deep. Below, the space opened up into a vast black ocean. I hoped to reach the bottom so I could trudge along the floor to find the wall, but I only kept sinking.
What?
Beneath me, there was only emptiness. There was no floor.
What?
I could see nothing, of course, but to me it felt
Yeah,
infinite,
when they get sucked into the...
like I was slowly
mushroom
falling
colony.
down an endless void. The air in my lungs pushed against my ribs, desperate to be let out.
It's basically the Matrix.
Then something swam past me.
A dog.
I couldn't tell what it was.
Dry bones. Yeah,
A
the
giant
tail's still
ancient
right there.
creature. A skeletal boy who now lived in the labyrinth.
A giant ancient creature.
Or maybe it wasn't something separate and apart from the cave. Maybe it was a part of it. Like a tendril or a pulsing vein.
What?
My lungs burned. I opened my mouth. The water rushed in. It flooded every part of me. I woke up choking. All at once, it felt so ridiculous.
It was a dream.
Of course it had been a dream. It had to be. Once I caught my breath again,
all it was?
I lay down, trying to calm myself. I watched the ceiling, and as I drifted off again, I could have sworn the pattern on the drywall began to swirl. It's been some time since the dream, though how long I can't really be sure. I've moved on from all of that. Even the town is only a memory to me now. I work in the city. I have lunch in the courtyard of one of those new big glass buildings. Every night when I go to sleep, I stare at my ceiling and just before
In the thumbnail,
I fall
I
asleep,
thought it was like a collar, but it's just like a scarf.
sometimes it feels like the world isn't right.
I don't know why. I thought this story was going to get
hard to explain what I mean.
really weird.
But sometimes, as I'm going about my day, eating my lunch, sitting on the bus, watching the people on the other side of the window go about theirs,
Wrong button.
something feels off.
Yeah, your friends
The
fucking
people
died.
around me are always pleasant and fine, but there's something not right about them. And sometimes when I'm alone, I wonder if I'm still there.
What is
Still in
this
that
story?
Just sinking into nothingness. I wonder if all this time I've been there. I've been sinking.
I like it when it's like an actual
What
tangible
if I
thing.
never truly woke up? What if right now
Not like, oh, it was just a
I'm in
dream.
the belly of some great beast that placates my mind while slowly
Oh,
but
yeah.
surely it devours me?
It is the fucking Mushroom X-Files. It's like the unseen world thing.
Thanks for watching the Assassin Rapper.
This is really
and if
what
you
it is.
enjoy the content, then
I enjoy the content. Here's a Assassin Rapper. Check him out. Da-da-da. I saw some really fucking weird shit today. I don't even know if I want to watch this on stream. It's pretty fucking weird, but this shit is bizarre.
Hi, this is me, Christopher, a crypto degen with a crush for crypto kitties. I'm on my way to Cryptoland, the #1 crypto destination on Earth where crypto enthusiasts,
Can you guys
or
see this today?
cryptolanders, like we're called here, can meet with like-minded individuals in real life. And when Connie, the founder, told me that visionary investors could own a piece of this unique island, I
This
bought one of the 60
is
exclusive parcels on the
like
blockchain hills.
Xavier,
That's how I
Renegade
became
Angel.
a king cryptolander. And there it is.
This is some fucking nightmare fuel.
So, are you coming to the Vladimir club party tonight? Yeah, just for
Listen to these fucking audio.
Right? Yeah, man.
Have a nice day, sir.
There he is. That's the guy. That's the bit. That's the man. That's the coin. He's the guy. Shit coin.
Connie?
Christopher! Come here, buddy!
Oh, it's been a while.
Yeah, 50,000 blocks at least. Been waiting for you since consensus. What are you, a pending transaction or what?
Well,
It's
I
like the
guess I'm
Family
confirmed
Guy
now. Ready to
version
become
of
a
Robin
Cryptoland
Williams, but he's a
maximalist. This is
Bitcoin.
crazy.
That's what he sounds like.
Sir, welcome to Cryptoland, the hodlers of last resort.
Oh, brilliant. Hey, stacking sats like crazy, right?
Honey Badger don't care.
We are gonna make it!
All the
Community's
memes.
loving it, like on Twitter. Can't wait for you to give me a tour, Connie.
What do you want to see first, Christopher?
I don't know. Let's start with the best.
No, I always keep the best for last. Let's go leave your luggage in your home first, and then I'll show you around. All the other King Cryptolanders have been arriving from all corners of the world. When we get to the blockchain hills, you're gonna understand what I meant by first-class crypto lifestyle,
fucking
man.
insane.
Hey, Martin, please get us a car, would you?
I think it might actually be a parody.
Everybody
There's
is
no way
here.
that someone made this and was actually like, yeah,
Alan, here he is.
people will like this.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Adams. Nice to see you, sir. Did you have a good flight?
Oh, yes. Excellent. Thanks for asking.
Great. Here are your keys.
Not your keys, not your bitcoins. Seriously?
So whack.
Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin.
Where do you come up with these crazy ideas?
These crazy ideas.
I'm not gonna tell you where.
Bro, I think this is real.
Sir,
The Lambo's ready.
What?
To the room, not the moon. Entering the blockchain hill.
Hey, what's that?
The Vladimir Club, Cryptolanders members only club. We are preparing everything for tonight. We are throwing the most epic crypto party ever. I
Look
wonder
at
who your
his
plus
fucking
one is going to
face. Hold on.
everything.
What the fuck, man? Look at his eyes. Fucking cheekbones. It looks like one of those cheap chocolate coins you would open up and it'd be like like chocolate inside. Except with this guy, you open him up and it's just shit inside. He does look exactly like one of those
For tonight,
chocolate
we are
coins.
throwing the most epic crypto party ever. I wonder who your plus one is going to be. Here we are, King Cryptolanders territory.
Wow.
And here you have the 60 parcels.
I can't wait to get to mine.
Ta-da!
Oh my, wow.
They were sick of.
Hey,
Don't be shy. Don't be boom.
the de-stress room?
Yeah, the de-stress
animation,
room.
too.
A pool full of coins? That's insane.
Don't be.
If you want.
Oh, and ordered
So fucking-
and like my Mount Gox friend, but
And then
enough
it
of.
actually like turns into like, oh yeah, they rip off Aladdin. And Crazy Frog.
Connect a little bit, you know, and have fun.
Oh my.
Look at those people. Did you see that? The guys like they're like fucking frozen.
Have fun.
He's like completely not animated.
Oh my god. This must be a joke.
Hey, Christopher, check that out. I bet you haven't seen a pinball better than this one in your entire life. The world is not anymore like it used to be. No, no, no.
Oh, look at all these details.
Create an account, deposit your money, lock it up.
Is that the Bitcoin
become
guy?
Rich,
Big
involve
Connect guy?
family and friends. Check your balance.
Oh, I love these games.
Well, if you like these games, then you might want to try Carlos in New York and Ponzi Connect. While I kick Bernie Madoff's ass.
Or is that someone completely
Ring,
different?
ting, 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 ting.
This is like the Disneyland of cryptos.
Oh, no, give me my wallet! No, my hardware wallet!
Are you okay?
Yes, but he got my wallet.
Enough is enough. I'm gonna get him. Hey, darling. I know where we can get a 20% gain.
20%?
Or more. Let's take profits, baby. Before you go on free fall.
Dude,
Oh no, he's flying away.
look at the hair.
Forget about it. Bitcoin is dead.
Oh my god, thank you.
Holy
By the way,
shit.
I'm Bianca.
Christopher, nice to meet you again. Would you like to go for a walk?
Actually, I was thinking about taking a crypto kitty. Would you mind sharing?
I would love to.
It's so fucking bad. Oh my god. Crypto land. It looks like it's a thing that people have been memeing on for like the past month. But yeah, it's hard to tell if it's actually like a parody or if it's like a self-aware thing where it's like, this is so stupid. I don't know. Either way. I honestly don't know. It only has like 7,000 views on it. Hard to tell. Ding, 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 ding. It did. I saw a version earlier that has like it goes into a pitch and it shows all this other shit. I don't know. That one didn't have that on it though. It doesn't even matter what it is. That was funny as fuck. Can't believe that that is a real thing. I'm gonna have crazy frogs stuck in my fucking head all day. Ring ding 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 ding. Bing 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 bing. Looking for another video to throw on. Yeah, I think there's a new Dr. Bob actually. Maybe there wasn't. Ah, sentient microorganism. All right, Dr. Bob.
A doctor frantically writes in his journal, "It's almost impossible to believe everything that's transpired has taken place in such a short amount of time. It all began 3 days ago.
Professor Hamburger.
It was just another day down in the mines. A worker was drilling into a seam of coal when suddenly there was an issue with the rig.
It's like a
From what I've gathered,
drill, dude.
it sounds like the drill bit exploded due to some kind of mechanical defect, sending shards of metal flying throughout the tunnel.
Dildo.
The worker was lucky that none of
wasn't
the
that a
large
Game Boy
pieces
Advance
struck
game,
him,
Dildo?
as they surely would have been fatal. He had, though, still been grazed by a piece of shrapnel from the ruined drill bit, and it had left a deep cut across his upper arm. Other miners who were working nearby heard the commotion and quickly came to his aid. They applied a tourniquet to stem the flow of blood
Drill dozer,
and helped him
okay.
to the mine shaft elevator for the
That's
long
nice.
ride to the surface. Once they reached the safety of daylight, they brought the injured man to the on-site medical clinic, where I was on duty at the time.
When I say drill,
I cleaned the
you
wound
say
since there
drill.
was a substantial amount of coal dust that had gotten inside, before suturing and bandaging it. The miner was sent to his bunkhouse to recover, and I thought that would be the end of it. Of course, it was only the beginning. Roughly 24 hours later, the same miner presented himself to me once again. I asked about his injury, and he explained that while his arm was fine, he now felt like he might be coming down with an illness. His
He made
symptoms
the
included a
fucking
runny
cartoon.
nose, a cough, and body aches. So my assumption was that he'd simply had some bad luck and caught a cold that just so happened to coincide with being injured on the job. I sent him to his bunk once again, telling him that he wouldn't be able to work and should instead use the day to rest and recover. The next day, I was once again in the clinic when my phone rang. It wasn't the sick miner, but instead his supervisor. The miner hadn't shown up for his shift that morning, and he asked for me to go check on him since he knew he hadn't been feeling well. I agreed that it was strange that neither of us had heard anything else from the miner and went to see him straight away. I entered the bunkhouse where many of the workers stay while on site at this remote mine. It was empty, except for the injured miner who was still in his bed. As I approached, I could immediately tell something was very wrong.
No.
The man was curled up in the fetal position and was sweating profusely while also shivering. A quick touch of his forehead revealed that the man had a high fever, too. He was practically incoherent, seemingly delirious from his high temperature. The miner was moved to the empty bed inside the clinic so I could better observe and tend to him, but very carefully since I assumed now that he was actually suffering from influenza and didn't want to risk an outbreak at the mine. I was getting ready to administer fluids to the miner, who was still mumbling incomprehensibly, when I noticed something on his face. It appeared that he was crying, but the tears that ran down his cheeks weren't made of water.
Eyes.
They were blood.
Turning into blood.
I hadn't seen anything like it before. There was no reason why influenza should be causing this man to cry tears of blood. I could see the veins in his forehead starting to pulse, as if his blood pressure had suddenly skyrocketed. And just as I was leaning in to get a closer look, something horrible happened. The miner suddenly opened his mouth and expelled an enormous stream of blood. The blast of blood struck me in the face and knocked me backwards in fright as the man continued expelling more and more blood from his mouth, which soon covered the walls of the clinic. With seemingly all the blood having been discharged from his body, the man then went
You've
limp.
never done that?
I attempted to resuscitate him, but strangely, there was no need.
How you
The
clear
man
out
was comatose, but he was
your
alive.
body?
There I was, standing in the middle of the clinic over the man, both he, myself, as well as the room completely covered in blood. It was one of the worst things I'd ever experienced as a doctor, and yet, somehow, it was about to get even worse. I was still in shock from what had just happened when I heard the door to the clinic open behind me. I turned around to see a group of half a dozen more miners from the site, each one coughing, sweating,
I thought that
and
guy had his
shivering.
liver in his hands.
One held a cloth to his ear that was stained red, while another attempted to stop his nose from bleeding. Whatever had infected the first patient wasn't a one-off medical event. This had the makings of an epidemic. I knew that I was in way over my head. I was just a general practitioner, not an infectious disease specialist, and I called the Center for Disease Control to get their guidance. I was told to quarantine the sick men as best I could, and that a rapid response team would be sent who were better equipped to deal with potential outbreaks.
Seal it up.
While I waited for the CDC to arrive, I began moving the afflicted men to a bunkhouse that had been designated for quarantining. Several more also began expelling huge amounts of blood, though unlike the first
Completely
patient,
normal.
none of the others survived the traumatic event.
Like how the drops of blood
As
are
I
like,
was putting the final infected man into a bed, I noticed something, though. There was a huge amount of heat radiating off of his lower body, and when I pulled down the blankets, I discovered something that even with all of the strange happenings, I still couldn't believe. There were huge lumps growing on his legs, each of which looked to be filled with some kind of fluid or gas, and they were extremely hot to the touch, as if the chemicals inside the lumps were creating a source of heat.
We gotta get the fuck
As I
out
was
of here.
investigating the bizarre growths,
Come on,
I suddenly
doctor.
looked up to see that the man was no longer in a state of delirium. Instead, a crazed look had come over his eyes, and he suddenly leapt out of bed, flailing and clawing at me as if he wanted to kill me. I don't know how, but I was able to fight off the man and run out of the bunkhouse.
Kill it.
He gave chase, though, and with no other option,
Barney.
I ran into a nearby storage shed. The man was beating and scratching at the door, and I was able to barricade it by dragging a heavy shelf in front of it. After several minutes of trying to break inside, he finally gave up and left.
Appreciate it.
And here I remain. I'm too afraid to go back out. It seems that if the disease won't kill me, then whatever it is turning people into will. All I can do is wait for the CDC team to get here and hopefully know how to deal with whatever the situation has become. The doctor closes his small notebook and notices a drop of something fall onto the cover. He reaches up and wipes his hand across his mouth.
Infected. Of
It
course
comes
you are.
back, covered in blood. The doctor didn't know what the disease was that had so rapidly spread through the workers at the mine, nor did the CDC response team when they arrived. No, it wasn't until the SCP Foundation caught word of the mysterious outbreak that someone would finally determine what was happening with what would soon be called
One of those
SCP-016,
balls.
which is also known as
all you
the
need.
sentient microorganism. SCP-016 is a blood-borne pathogen that was first discovered after a worker at a remote mine was injured while drilling into a coal seam deep beneath the earth. It is theorized that coal dust entered the wound, dust which perhaps carried dormant spores of what would become SCP-016. Over the next several days, all of the remaining employees at the mine were infected, as was the CDC crisis team that was sent to the mine to investigate the outbreak of what was potentially an undiscovered pathogen. Following the CDC's inability to deal with the disease, the SCP Foundation took over the site and quickly
SCP
terminated all
Foundation.
affected personnel in order to
Second
prevent
in
further
defense.
spread. The first infected person, Patient Zero, was taken into Foundation custody for further investigation, and the mine shaft itself was collapsed by an explosive device in order to seal it off. After studying Patient Zero, the Foundation
Looks like
learned a
he's,
great deal about
okay
just
now.
what they were dealing with. What they found was that SCP-016 has an incubation period that can vary wildly from just 24 hours to as long as 2 years, with the length appearing to be dependent on the number of other potential human hosts in the immediate area. Once symptoms begin to present in an individual, they will at first look to be quite similar to the common cold. They can include coughing, a runny nose, itchy eyes, and body aches. Roughly 48 hours after the first symptoms, the infected person will experience a form of hemorrhagic fever, similar to the Ebola virus, which causes a small amount of bleeding in the lungs. This leads to the infected blood becoming aspirated, most likely in order to better spread through the air. The third stage of the disease leads to the host crashing and bleeding out, as they start to bleed profusely from multiple body orifices, including the nose, tear ducts, mouth, and even through the pores of their skin. Their blood pressure will also skyrocket during this final stage, and in some cases, have vomited blood as far as 5 meters. Oddly enough, although most die from the traumatic event, this almost complete exsanguination will not always result in death. Sometimes, following the removal of almost all blood from the body, the patient will somehow survive, and the pathogen inside their body will return to its dormant phase once again, before eventually repeating the process.
What?
But SCP-016 is more than just a rapid and often deadly bloodborne disease, as you will soon see. As SCP researchers studied the disease, what they discovered was that it had a very strange property that sets it apart from other hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola and the Marburg virus. What they found was that when someone infected with SCP-016 is placed into a high-stress situation, such as one where their life is being threatened, SCP-016 will transition from rapidly reproducing inside of its host's body to instead begin rewriting their host's actual DNA. This genetic manipulation, combined with the stimulation of rapid cell division, leads to the host undergoing major physiological changes and in extremely small amounts of time. In just 24 hours, the host can begin showing physical changes to their body, and a complete bodily reconstruction can occur in less than 2 weeks. Most of the hosts who begin to undergo physical changes will not survive the process, due to how heavily the transformation stresses the body, but those that do will be changed in more than just physical ways. They'll exhibit hyper-aggressive behaviors, not dissimilar to those infected by rabies. And it's theorized that the pathogen may cause this behavior in order to better spread the virus.
What?
When the Foundation realized that SCP-016 was capable of these transformative effects, they immediately undertook a number of experiments on D-Class personnel in order to better understand their full extent. In the first test, a D-Class was infected with SCP-016, and as soon as they began showing symptoms, their cell was slowly flooded with water in order to stimulate the life-threatening situation needed to trigger the transformation process. Over the next 24 hours, researchers watched as the subject appeared to develop gills, which would allow it to survive in the now water-filled cell. The transformations didn't stop there, though, and over the next 2 weeks, the subject also had their limbs change into fins, their eyesight deteriorated, and their sense of hearing increased as they developed an echolocation ability very similar to the one employed by whales and dolphins. The experiment was concluded by removing all of the water from the cell, leading to the death of the subject from asphyxiation, as they could no longer breathe
Put him in the
the open
water.
air. A similar
just let him
experiment
die.
was performed on another D-Class, but this time, instead of taking on aquatic animal properties, the D-Class experienced rapid muscle growth, and their knuckles grew bone-like protrusions.
Comes the tyrant.
It attempted to use both of these to break through the door of their flooding cell, but they were unable to breach the reinforced steel, and soon died from drowning. The Foundation now knew that the virus could react in different ways to the same situation. The same experiment was run a third time, but in this instance, the infected D-Class exhibited an entirely different means of trying to escape. The subject had a massive growth appear on its chest, which seemed to be fed from 2 different tubes of flesh, also emanating from the subject's body.
What?
Fearing what it planned to do, the Foundation ended the experiment early and terminated the subject. An autopsy revealed that the growth was actually a hollow chamber that was being fed by the tubes with oxygen and acetylene gas, which when combined in sufficient amounts would cause a massive combustion event. In other words, SCP-016 was turning the subject into a living bomb. Moving on from flooded cell tests, the researchers next left a D-Class inside of a room with no stressing elements, and instead told them to focus on growing a pair of wings. Without any reason to begin the transformation process, SCP-016 went through its normal stages, and the subject died from blood loss without any other changes occurring. In the final test, a D-Class was placed inside of an acrylic box that was suspended over a mine shaft, with a timer attached indicating the time when the bottom of the box would open and drop the D-Class into the 1,000-foot deep shaft. This D-Class was also told to focus on growing wings that would allow them to survive the plunge. The subject began to transform over the next 24 hours, but rather than grow wings, they instead developed a tentacle-like appendage on their arm that was capable of producing silk, similar to a spider's spinneret. They used the silk-producing organ to secure themselves to the box, showing that subjects did not appear to be able to control the way in which SCP-016 would alter their bodies. This experiment concluded when the timer reached 0 and the bomb attached to it detonated, as had been the plan all along. Following this last test, SCP-016 samples were placed into containment, and access to the sample for experimental purposes is only allowed with prior authorization from Level 4 or 05 personnel, with full documentation of the proposed experiment required beforehand. Failure to follow any of these procedures will lead to the offending personnel being reassigned to D-Class duty or terminated.
D-Class duty.
SCP-016 has been classified as Keter, and the only existing sample is kept in a petri dish, which is under extreme lockdown inside of a 5 by 5 by 5 meter room, where the temperature is kept below 0 degrees Celsius at all times.
Petri dish?
Should an outbreak of SCP-016 occur, all infected personnel are to be immediately terminated on site. And if the infection cannot be contained within 48 hours, then the on-site nuclear device is to be detonated prior to any additional personnel being evacuated. While the containment procedures may sound callous, unfortunately, when it comes to anomalous pathogens as dangerous as SCP-016, no chances can be taken. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-150, the body-stealing parasite, for another SCP that will get inside of you and do frightening things to your body. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.
Check it out, Dr. Bob. Good doctor.
Two men.
Remember this guy? Got him. Boom, 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 boom. What else do I want to watch? There was a video I was thinking of earlier that I can't even remember now. Ah, son of a bitch. I think there was some new Assassin Ramper stuff too. Or maybe that was the only one. Is there a Garden Gnome SCP? There is. Pretty sure there's a Dr. Bob video. All my recommendations are Zomboid videos right now. Boom, 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 boom. I don't know. Let's see if we watched all these. Yeah, we did watch all. A tree. I think you mean. I guess we could just fall back onto Sir Spooks.
Losing any member of your family will undoubtedly be quite heartbreaking, and it takes plenty of time to heal, sometimes months or even years depending on circumstances. Millions of people all around the world consider their pets, such as their dogs, a part of their family. After all, They are man's best friend. But the following video published to Reddit by username CandiceMay3 showcases some eerie evidence that perhaps dogs do have an afterlife. The uploader provides some context, stating that her dog passed away about a year ago, and she kept all of her belongings, including her favorite ball, to play with. Candice has a security camera installed inside her home that records activity throughout the night, as do millions of Americans. The following video was recorded on her camera at around 4 AM and seems to showcase some genuinely unsettling activity. Take a look.
Oh my god. What if a ghost dog just jumped up?
Just a couple of seconds into the video, what seems to be a
Imagine
normal
that
night
was
in
a dog.
Candace's house quickly turns into something much more bizarre.
Like a
Her
fucking
dog's
speck of
favorite
dust.
ball can be seen rolling across the floor,
Oh, it is the ball.
seemingly
Never mind.
all by itself. Before
It's a
just
speck of
seconds
dust.
later, a door in the background can be seen opening. Also, the ornaments on the tree can be seen moving throughout the clip, but that could of course be a draft or something like that. Candice states that she is usually quite skeptical when it comes to things such as the paranormal, but after reviewing the footage, she simply has no other explanation for what she saw. So, what do you think Candice is dealing with here? Was this the spirit of her deceased canine
Maybe the
trying to give her
ball
a signal that it's okay? Is there another possible explanation for this?
has the soul of the dog.
Let me
in
know
it.
your thoughts in the comments.
That's what you're saying, isn't it?
If you were to take a quick look at the YouTube channel
Mr. P's
12,
identity has been stolen?
you would notice that almost all of his videos are random videos relating to video games such as Fortnite and Among Us, as well as other vlog-style videos. Long story short, you'd think that Lightroad would be the last person on the platform to upload a video that terrifies viewers.
That's so...
But
No, I would
alas,
not. I
one
would think
video
they
on his
would.
channel has certainly stood out from the crowd and has gotten a ton of viewers
They
talking.
don't upload
The video in
anything
question was
except
uploaded
Among
in
Us
October of
videos, so
2019
why would they post
and
a
opens
fake
up with
ghost
some
video?
text explaining that the uploader noticed
They're
something
spooks, come on,
strange
man.
nearby his school one day. At the
I believe the
time,
Queen
he was
fucking made
unable
this
to
guy.
record what he saw, but he decided he wanted to go back to the school a bit later on to see if he could finally get it on camera. And sure enough, he did.
Dude, what is that?
Oh no.
Shh, shh, shh.
No Among Us player would ever do this.
What's the... Oh my gosh! Oh! Help! Oh my gosh!
Real.
In the video, we follow Lightroad and a friend as they walk around the schoolyard premises
spooks, come
during
on,
the middle
man.
of the night, when only crickets can be heard chirping away. But then just a couple of seconds later, as you can see, a horrifying figure appears out of nowhere and begins to chase the uploader, who then lets out a terrified scream before the video abruptly ends. The uploader believes that he may have encountered none other than a Sasquatch that day. Of course, whether or not this was actually a Sasquatch will never be confirmed, but it's certainly quite a chilling bit of evidence and one that is sure to keep you awake at night, pondering the possibilities.
A man on TikTok named Alex Calvo uploaded a video to his account on August 4th, 2021, where he walks around his new house that he recently purchased, taking his young children on a tour with him. Upon walking in the house to show the kids around, Alex makes a throwaway remark that the house looks a little scary, but he doesn't think too much about it. For the next couple of seconds, Alex can be heard listing off things he sees in the house, including a dollhouse that he says his young daughter can play with. So far, so good. However, in just a matter of seconds, this relatively simple video is about to take a seriously sinister turn. Take a look at this part of the video right here and pay close attention to the mirror adorning the wall.
Okay.
Got everybody here. Heading on into the new house for the first time.
I saw this clip before.
You say go, yeah. See how scary? It's kind of scary, actually. Oh, look at all this stuff.
Look at all this random stuff in my new house.
Dollhouse for you, Salo. Go. Okay.
Pretend like you don't want to live here, okay?
This kitchen's pretty nice.
Ready? I'm ready to go out, Grandma.
Go close the door.
When Alex initially walks past the mirror to head into another room to videotape, you can make out what appears to be a creepy
Who did
figure,
he say this is?
which some think looks like
who's
a
he,
nun
collabing with?
standing right in the house, which Alex did not notice at the time of
The
recording.
voice sounds familiar.
But what makes this video even more chilling is that when Alex walks by the exact same mirror just a couple of seconds later, the figure is mysteriously gone without a trace. It is definitely quite interesting too that Alex briefly mentioned that he thought the house was a bit creepy when he walked in initially, only for his suspicions to be proven correct just about 20 seconds later. But the big question at play here is, how in the world a nun appeared in Alex's mirror, then miraculously disappeared just a few seconds afterward? This is one video that is definitely going to make you scratch your head, desperately searching for answers. To this day, Alex has no idea.
Oh, let's
what
read.
happened,
Okay, yeah, okay.
And it seems as though
I didn't
this
see it
mystery
in the info, though.
may never be solved.
Oh, I'm a fucking idiot. It's the first thing. Oh my god. My man.
A Spanish TikTok user named Cesar Torres uploaded a bone-chilling video to his account in January of 2021 that escalates in terror as the seconds go by. In the video, we watch Cesar as he simply tries his best to relax and unwind for the night while watching some television. However, what he hoped would be a night of relaxation and peace was
that wire would
anything
drive
but.
me fucking crazy.
The very instant this video begins, it is clear that Caesar is dealing with something utterly terrifying.
A bunch of wires? I don't even give a shit. One wire?
Just
Don't like
a couple
that.
of seconds in, Caesar's television begins to make loud beeping noises while also turning on and off frequently, which definitely freaks him out more than a little bit. Not knowing what to do, he simply stays in bed in complete shock and awe.
I think he's like tripping balls.
A couple of seconds pass by where it
after
seems
he,
as though perhaps Caesar's night of terror is just beginning to settle down. But, as you can probably
like recording
predict,
his hand for 40
things don't
minutes.
exactly go over that smoothly.
No te pases de la roña, no manches. O sea, chequen mis manos de verdad. Yo, o sea, no sé, no, hace como 2 días que no encuentro el control. No entiendo cómo está pasando esto. No.
No.
Mames, qué pedo.
No mames.
O sea, chequen, mis manos están aquí. No, la verga.
No mames, no mames.
A strange noise can be heard coming from nearby, which audibly startles Caesar. And then, just a couple of seconds later, something incredibly odd can be seen sitting down in the background at the end of the video. Thankfully, no harm came to Caesar that night, but it still doesn't explain what he experienced that night and what that strange figure was at the very end.
Who is that?
What do you think he ended up capturing on camera that night? Was he being visited by some sort of paranormal entity? Was the figure actually just something else that looked eerily similar to a person? And what caused his television to malfunction like that? Be sure to let me know your ideas in the comments.
What are your ideas?
Trishu143 is a popular Indian ghost hunting channel on YouTube that focuses on urban explorations, paranormal investigations, and much more.
Wild ass.
Although a lot of their videos are definitely filled with their fair share of chilling moments to satisfy all your paranormal needs,
The
one
Hulk
video stands out as one of the creepiest.
Look at this. I went to the death house again. He has this like fucking haggard looking Hulk doll on his lap.
He has ever uploaded to his channel. The video, which was published online on February 28, 2021, follows the uploader as he ventures out to an abandoned school located somewhere in India that just so happens to be haunted, or so legend says. When they first arrive at the school, it is crystal clear that the place has seen much better days. Although the interior is mostly intact and not broken down to shreds, it's still an uncomfortably isolated school, and one that seems to be filled with all sorts of looming dread. Little does the uploader know that he is in for more than he bargained for. Just about 17 minutes into the video, the cameraman is exploring a room which seems to be completely empty. As he proceeds to take a look around, he hears something terrifying that immediately grabs his attention. Have a listen.
Hey!
It's Trishy143.
Hey!
Yeah, what the fuck is that?
A couple of minutes later, Trishy slowly makes his way around the school, careful not to make any loud noises now that he has suspicions that he's not alone after all. He then makes his way to the roof of the school, where he is shrouded by darkness, which is terrifying all on its own. But then this happens to further propel his fear.
Is that a car?
Hey! Water bottle கீழ இருந்து வந்திருக்கு. Hey!
Always glad to play some videos on stream. It's definitely a lot of fun. Hope you enjoy.
So far, all of the creepy things that the uploader has experienced have all been auditory things. But as he makes his way down a long corridor just a couple of minutes later, he finally gets his first visual clue that somebody or something is keeping him company.
Looks fucking nasty. Ghost capture. Yo, is that my arrow?
Although at this point, Trishy is undoubtedly growing more and more uncomfortable with each passing moment. He nevertheless finds the courage within himself to keep moving forward and continue his investigation, which eventually leads him down yet another dark hallway, where he makes another startling discovery shortly thereafter.
Okay, ஆறல்ல கேமரா இங்கே செட் பண்ணிடுறேன்.
Ghost capture.
Not wanting to call it quits just yet, he proceeds to continue, despite how creepy things have been during the night, which results in two more unsettling things happening before he eventually makes the wise decision to call it a night. Take a look and have a listen.
He's got like a denim trench coat on. Oh no, it's not denim.
Guys, ஏதோ சவுண்ட் கேக்குது.
Who is it?
Guys, ஏதோ குழந்தை அழுகுற சவுண்ட் தான் கேக்குது. எங்க கேக்குது தெளிவா கேக்குது சவுண்டு.
It always fascinates me just how many terrifying things seem to happen in abandoned schools, seeing as how they are buildings that were quite literally built on the foundation of learning. Children are supposed to go there to be happy, make friends, and learn new things. But as videos like this one prove, not even schools are safe from the paranormal, even after they are left abandoned. And that was 5 scary videos. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then subscribe for more scary content. Be sure to check out Let's Read, link for his channel will be in the description.
Let's read. Oh, Sir Spook. You know what I kind of want to watch since we've been watching some Zomboid? A lot of people will probably not like this, but Wendigoon did like a Walking Dead iceberg at one point. What the fuck is that shit? That's kind of interesting. It's got some zombie shit in it. I haven't watched a Wendigoon video in a while on stream. Where the fuck did he put this shit? All these fucking thumbnails of icebergs. All exactly the same. You ever do that thing with the find tool and like Chrome or something, and you find the thing, but you can't pick it out? Oh, there it is.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Walking Dead iceberg. And this is the first iceberg that I've made for the
This is
channel.
an older one,
for
but
this video, I wanted the
I really
themes
like,
to be hidden Easter eggs, secret theories about the show, or
really
just
like
cool
Wendigoon.
facts that not a lot of people know about. That being said, a big inspiration was Lazy Mobile
Been sleeping with
1806,
some of his
which
videos on
they made
sometimes.
one of the best icebergs I've seen. And not only did I take a lot of inspiration and topics from that one, they were also very helpful to me on Reddit when I had a couple questions about the topics within the iceberg, so show them some love if you can. A couple things of note off the bat: there will be no big spoilers past season 9 of the show. So if you're still watching or care
I don't even
about
know what
spoilers
fucking
after
season
that,
we're- they're
that's
like
as
11
far as
they're
I'm
on, I
going to
think?
cover. There's a couple
I actually
things
have
that
watched
are
some of
in
it.
season 10, but they're in no way
I
plot
didn't hate
spoilers.
some of
They're
it, but
pretty
some of
much
it was
just
kinda lame.
background elements that I'm going to make a point out of. And
I like
secondly,
Jeffrey
there's
Dean
one
Morgan.
topic in tier 3 that, despite
And
me
he's still on the
putting it
show.
in my own iceberg, I'm going to take it out for the video. It's Michonne's Negan hallucination, and while it's an interesting part of the show, after research, I kind of decided there wasn't really a ton to talk about, so I'm just going to cut it. I'm excited to talk about what is, in my opinion, the coolest parts of the show itself and what made the series so great, especially in the beginning. Also, if it's been a while since you've seen the show or you're just vaguely interested in it, I try to cater the iceberg in a way that it starts with concepts that most people who have a general idea of what the show's about could get a hold of, but as we go further down, it's going to get more hairy. And you know what else is hairy? You.
This fucking Manscaped
Probably.
ad read.
Watching.
I'm gonna
Off the
skip
tier
that
1.
one. Say
Glenn
one
never
again.
killed until season 6 is just a fact in plain sight that not a lot of people notice. Not killing was
Some
a
of
big
these are just,
part
like,
of
interesting
Glenn's
things that
character, because
I
especially
never
as the
even
show
thought
went
about while I
on
was
and the
watching this.
characters began to be more and more degraded from where they once began, Glenn
Yeah, I
was
have no
always sort
hair.
of
It's all
hailed
melted off.
as this picture of purity. Like, he was the nerd who used to play
dipped
video
myself
games
in
and
a
delivered
vat
pizza,
of
and then
Nair.
he became the young romantic, and he was sort of an outlet for the hopes of a lot of the characters. And what's interesting about the way the show's structured, when his first kill did come in season 6 episode 12, the fact that it was his first kill was kind of overshadowed by the fact that this is just what the group does now. I remember watching the episode for the first time, and his first kill is the guy who's asleep in the Savior compound, and you can see Glenn struggling to bring the knife
I
down.
don't remember that either,
And whenever
but-
I watched that for the first time, I thought, oh, well, it's because he's never killed
I never really
someone
picked up on the
asleep
fact that he
before.
never killed
And then
anyone
I thought about it afterwards and said,
in the show at all.
wow,
except for
he's
zombies, I
never killed
guess.
anyone before. And also, spoilers again, but
It
I
kinda
mentioned
makes
that at the
sense, I
beginning.
guess.
By the time of his death, he had only ever killed 5 people. To put that in perspective, at the time of Glenn's death, Carol,
It just seems like
Daryl,
they're,
and
like, killing
Rick
mad people
had
all the time.
46, 49, and 54 human kills respectively. I'm going to talk more in a bit how character themes and a loss of innocence applies to the greater show at large, but we'll get to that. Space Spore is in reference to the fact that Robert Kirkman has said the
Space
original
Spore.
cause of the zombie virus, or sorry, Walker virus, was a spore that came to Earth from a meteorite. Now, he said this specifically
I kind of like
about
zombies
the comics,
coming from space. I like
but
that.
since that's the canon way, apparently,
I think
that
that's
it went
cool.
in the comics and the show never says, I mean, we can pretty much assume. And that can even be used to get over some gaps in understanding. Like, for example, if this is just a disease, how can people be?
Because if
a
it's like from
disembodied head
space, you
and
could
still
do
be
whatever the
alive?
fuck you
so
want
the
with
answer is simply space aliens. And that's all there is to it. Of course, this is never said in the comics and TV show, and frankly, I don't really want it to be. But the fact that he said that was a reference to the movie Night of the Living Dead, in which, in that movie, which several held is the first zombie movie of all time, it was also a space spore that caused the infection. So, a reference that Robert Kirkman threw in because, as we're going to see, he really likes his references. Jeffrey DeMunn's departure. All right.
Yo, I love that guy.
Starting off with the good stuff. Jeffrey DeMunn is the actor who plays Dale in the first 2 seasons of the show. If you recognized him on the show, it's probably from movies like The Mist or The Green Mile. And actually, looking at The Mist specifically, you're going to see a lot of familiar faces between it and The Walking Dead.
Yeah, I really
the
like
reason
The Mist
for
a
this
lot.
is because The Walking Dead originally hired the head writer and show lead of Frank Darabont. And Frank Darabont and Jeffrey DeMunn are very
I don't know why.
close
I've watched
friends
that
in
movie
real
probably
life.
like over a
So
dozen
whenever
times.
Frank got the show, he got several of his previous actors who have worked with him, including Jeffrey, to come on. So you know how a lot of people say that the first season of The Walking Dead's what really sold it, and after that it kind of just fizzled for a while and then had its high parts, but nothing really compared to that opening? Well, my argument for that would be that Frank
I don't
Darabont
like how he
knew what
died.
he was doing. He wanted the show to be grand and have these overarching themes of the human condition and how it all relates back to the story of Rick and his family. And a lot of the clever foreshadowing and setups we see for things that happen later in the series began in those first 6 episodes. However, whenever it came time for season 2 to come around, AMC said that they didn't want to spend as much money. This is the reason that season 1 is set in these massive cityscapes with these huge hordes everywhere, and then season 2 mostly takes place on a farm with 2 characters on screen at a time. Frank Darabont protested this because he was like, you want me to make a good show and you have the money for it, why can't I have more? To which AMC just kicked him out. And I mean, looking at Frank Darabont's career, I mean, what? This guy directed The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile.
Ridiculous.
It's not like he knows how to adapt a story or anything. So Frank did season 1 and then the first episode of season 2 before leaving.
It could have
That's
been
where Jeffrey
so
comes in.
fucking
See,
good,
Dale is a huge role in the comic books. As a matter of fact, for a long time, he remains as the group's
Imagine
sort
the
of
second
moral
season if he
compass
had done it. It
before
could have been
being
really
killed
fucking cool.
by the Hunters, which on the TV show is pretty close to what Terminus became.
disappointment.
So in other words, he was supposed to last a really long time. The reason he did it on the show, it's widely believed, is because they got rid of his friend Frank. And the fact that immediately after The Walking Dead, Frank and Jeffrey started a new series is kind of proof of that.
What
We're
was
going to
the new
talk about what
series
his plans for
that they started right after? Was it Under the Dome? That was not good though. Was it Under the Dome?
the show was later on. But man, like, YMS or Your Movie Sucks did a really good video.
Yeah,
in his
YMS is
Walking
very
Dead
good about
review where
Walking
he
Dead.
talks all
That
the
was like
specifics
5
of
years,
it.
6 years ago,
It
though.
is frustrating.
I didn't
Coma
really like
Theory
Under the Dome.
is saying that
Was
the
that them,
entirety
though? Was
of
that
the
him?
TV show
Was that
is
Darabont?
taking place in Rick's head while he's still in a coma. The theory says that things like he
Assassin
shouldn't be able
rapper
to
Coma
survive
Theory.
in the hospital for that long, and this entire show is Rick's walk through purgatory. And in some instances even goes into detail to say things like all of the gang that we see in the show is just the hospital staff coming around that he's incorporating into this dream
What
of his.
the
So
fuck?
the whole "it was all a dream" thing, because
That's the lamest
if Dallas
thing I've ever
didn't ruin it enough, the internet definitely will. The telephone scene is a series of 4 phone calls that Rick has in season 3 between episodes 5 and 6. After Lori's death, a phone rings in the desolate prison, to which when answering it, he's greeted by the voice of Amy. And then after that in order, Jim, Jackie,
remember that.
and Lori. All 4 being members of Rick's group who have previously died. Whenever Rick is talking to them, they're very vague about their location that they are at, but just say things like, we're safe away from
It came
them,
out
no one's
after,
been
but it
bit,
was a
no
book that
one's
Stephen
died,
King
etc.
wrote
Which of
before
course,
that-
as we figure out
the
once we
Simpsons
learn
movie.
that these are 4 dead people we're talking to, is all in reference to the afterlife. However, what's interesting is that this doesn't devolve into your stereotypical oh, you should join us, Rick, join us, or whatever. And instead, by the end of the phone call, Lori essentially tells Rick to man up
Mob
and
City?
take care of their children.
I don't even
I'm
know
not
if
going to
I've ever
talk
heard of
about
that.
what that may mean just yet, but keep that scene
I
in
assume
mind.
that did
and
not
then
do
in
well
a scene
then.
that took place moments before the telephone scene, we have Lori's body.
Yeah,
so
that
if you
part was
remember in
fucked
season
up.
3, Lori gives birth to Judith and then is killed by Carl so that way she doesn't turn. And then whenever Rick clears the prison to find her body, we see that there's no body there at all, and instead a trail of blood leads to a bloated walker, implying that the walker ate her body entirely. Now this is strange for several reasons. For one, that is a lot for one walker to eat, and for two, how did it manage to eat her entire skeleton? And we know from the hair around the walker's mouth as well as the bloated stomach of it that Rick tries to cut open that is indeed the implication we're supposed to get. It turns out that in the original script, Rick walks into the room and
gross.
there is
Hair on the
instead
mouth.
a picked clean skeleton just covered in blood lying next to this walker. However, AMC made them pump the brakes on that because, you know, like showing zombies get stabbed in the head is fine, but a skeleton? Whoa. It would have been pretty brutal, to be fair, for Rick to come find his wife and it's just like a red skeleton laid out on the floor. So they just filmed the scene exactly as it was supposed to be, but without the skeleton on the floor, which led to the fan theory that the walker ate her bones. So there's a
I don't know, I think that would be pretty
We
dope.
are now on to tier 2.
They don't show
Breaking
enough
Bad is
skeletons
in reference
in
to the
zombie
fact
shit.
that it's basically confirmed that Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead take place in the same universe. Evidence of this is stuff like Merle Dixon
I love
has
this.
blue
This is
crystal
actually
meth
true, I
on his
think.
motorcycle, which is the meth that Heisenberg makes in Breaking Bad. In a conversation between Daryl and Beth, Daryl alludes to the fact that he used to know Jesse Pinkman, also from Breaking Bad. And between the two shows, several of the same props,
Like,
or
this is
at least
brilliant.
the same style of prop is used.
This is the
like
kind of thing
Dodge
that movie studios
Glenn
should do.
drives
They do
out of
do
Atlanta,
often, but-
as well as a coffee machine seen in the governor's office.
Like, if you guys have ever watched Lost and a lot of other shows share a lot of like the same props and like companies, made up companies and stuff like that, phone numbers. So the X-Files has a brand of cigarettes in it that the smoking man always is smoking. I think they're called Morley cigarettes. And like 8 different shows that Fox produced have these cigarettes in them. So I think like Lost, Millennium, a bunch of other shit. Oh, Lost was ABC. Well, anyways, I don't know. I just think that's neat when they do that with shows.
This has also led to a fan theory.
It doesn't
that
have to
the original
connect
cause of
anything
the infection
intrinsically, but
was
it's
the
still
blue
cool.
crystal meth, which I have to say I like more than the space spore thing. The orange backpack is a
Like,
bit
it's
more
fun
of
to
a
think that
symbolic
Breaking
Easter
Bad
egg.
and Walking Dead are in the same universe. I don't know. It's stupid, but it's funny.
If you'll remember in season 3, there is a scene where Rick is driving with some of the group by a hitchhiker on the side of the road who has a very large orange backpack. We see at the beginning of the episode, as the group is driving away, that he is screaming, asking for their help, and then at the end of the episode, they see his dead body. To which, in a rather cold manner, they stop the vehicle, take his backpack, put it in the car, and drive away. Now, we've seen that backpack pop up.
Really?
more
It
times
goes back
on the
even
show,
farther? I'm
but
not
when
surprised.
specifically have we?
That's
Well, one
cool.
of them was in season 4 whenever Glenn leaves the prison after the governor's attack, and then eventually runs into Tara and decides to take her in. Another time in later seasons is whenever Carl goes to see Sadiq and essentially offers him aid and eventually takes him in. To me, the backpack has always been a symbol of mercy. Or basically, there was an unnamed person on the side of the road who just wanted help, and then after he dies, the group takes his supplies and drives off. And as the group itself learns to be more trusting, we see that backpack or the remembrance of how they used to be show up whenever they extend an olive branch. So in my watching, every time you see an orange backpack on the show, it's a sign of trust in someone else. Or at least trust that they won't, kill you, which is saying a lot for the show. Opening title decay is a fact that, again, is right in front of your face that a lot of people just don't
Yeah,
notice.
it's like an
From
inside
season
joke in
1,
the-
it looked like
the
the
industry.
title was
It's
white
funny.
or sort of like
That's
a
awesome,
pale,
actually.
fresh body. And then throughout the seasons, the title has become more and more decayed, like a walker itself. And then finally, in the most recent season, there is a sort of green growth on it, symbolic of new life growing into the dead world. Well, maybe
You
a
worked
little
on
bit
Fear the Walking Dead?
heavy-handed.
Nice, dude.
They never directly talk about this other than just showing you the title, so
Coincidence?
I think it's fine. The phrase A or B has sparked a lot of questions. Once it's figured out in the show that Jadis, the leader of the Scavengers, is making contact with the helicopter people, and I know they have a better name, but I'm just going to keep calling them the
I don't even know
helicopter
who that
people.
character
It's
is.
revealed that she's been giving survivors to the helicopter people in exchange for supplies. Now, over the radio, she tells the helicopter people that she has an A whenever she kidnaps Negan. And we see that she has Negan tied up, and it appears tries to turn him into a walker by having another walker bite him. And then after Rick washes up on shore and the helicopter people are coming to get Jadis,
okay,
she
I
tells them, referring to Rick, that it's not an A, but she has a B to take with her. So it seems like A means people who are bitten and B means people who are not bitten, since whenever she had Negan tied up and was trying to get him to turn, she referred to him as an A, and whenever Rick wasn't bit and was fine, she referred to him as a B. But there's a wrench in that one. Jadis tries to get Father Gabriel to come with her to the helicopter people's base, and whenever Gabriel refuses, Jadis angrily replies, "And this whole time I thought you were a B," before also tying him up and then trying to do the whole bite thing that she was doing to Negan. So the whole bitten or not bitten thing doesn't make sense, because how could you be like, oh, and this whole time I thought you weren't bitten? Like, in my opinion, and this is just my speculation and the theory I came up with, A refers to a prisoner and B refers to a passenger. Or basically she has to take someone with her back to the base, so she was telling Gabriel, this whole time I thought you were going to come with me willingly, but now I've got to tie you up and take you possibly infected or restrained in some way at least. So A and B means prisoner and passenger.
I wonder if there's like a good video
further
about that,
evidence,
actually.
just
There
move
must
on.
be.
Rise of the Governor is a series of novels written by Robert Kirkman that is about the governor coming to power within Woodbury. It gives some interesting clues about the governor, like for
Do you
example,
hear the song in
his
the
name
background?
isn't Philip. That's actually
It's
the
quiet
name of
enough,
his
but
dead
if you-
brother, and he
if you
just took it
focus
on
on
for
it-
himself. And it follows him and his daughter Penny from the initial outbreak up until where the comic ends, while telling some stories from the comics from the governor's point of view. Not a lot to say about this one, but it's interesting that one of the best villains on the show has an entire series of books about him that not a lot of people know about. Negan intro refers to the fact that the version that most people saw on television is incredibly censored. And not in blood, they kept all that in. I mean the swearing. If while listening to Jeffrey Dean Morgan give the entire Negan speech, it felt kind of weird that he wasn't going all out with the bad guy, that's because he wasn't going all out. In the original recording, Jeffrey Dean Morgan drops 23 F-bombs, which of course AMC was not cool with putting on the air. So you can find the original uncensored version on YouTube and the DVD edition. And then on television, they just dubbed over nearly all of that. Similarly, the line from earlier in the show, whenever Rick and the group are held in the Terminus cart, and Rick says the phrase, "they're messing with the wrong people," that was also dubbed over. You can figure out what he said originally. Andrea Season 4 is another one of those interesting writer things. So in the original script versions of the show, Andrea was supposed to survive through Season 3 and take over Woodbury as their new leader, meaning that there would be two separate groups rather than what happened where the citizens of Woodbury simply come over to the prison. Not only that, but Andrea has a much bigger role in the comics, eventually becoming a love interest for Rick. So why didn't that happen? Well, 3 weeks before shooting began, Laurie Holden, the actress who plays Andrea, was told, "Hey, we're gonna kill you." And in a move that has been protested heavily since, they decided to redo all of that and kill off her character for shock value. This started, in my opinion, a very dangerous precedent for the show. So we get it's a zombie series, we get the people can die at any time, that's understood. But since it's also a story, it would be nice if characters had things like, arcs and meaning and, like importance. And a common thing you'll hear from a lot of people who worked on the show is that the plans that they had set up to be these big grand conclusions to storylines were often changed or altered because they were like, hey, you know what people wouldn't expect? if we ruin this storyline by killing this character, and there wasn't a lot anyone could do.
Yeah, she
so
sucked.
Andrea's death in the finale of season 3,
hated her.
when she was originally planned to develop into a much stronger character similar to the likes of Carol, is one of the earliest evidences of that. Now, that's not saying every change that they made wasn't good, because we're going to talk about some of the good ones later, but I mean, that's got to be annoying to set up all these characters and plot lines.
Trash
and then they're
people.
just like, hey,
yeah, I remember that.
what if you didn't? We are now on to tier 3. Helicopters have always been an interesting sort of thing that's been happening in the background of the show. It became more obvious later with characters like I mentioned Jadis and the aforementioned helicopter people, but there's always been weird signs of them. Like, helicopters have been seen in the skyline all the way back in season 2. Not only that, but after
Helicopters in the
mysterious
sky.
disappearances of characters like Heath, and then Tara finding a card that has PPP written on it, are all alluding to the fact that there's a bigger world happening around our group. There's been several theories about where the helicopters come from. A lot of them relate back to that lady named Georgie. Remember, the one who just showed up in a van to Hilltop and then gave them a bunch of diagrams to make windmills, then left? That was weird. But the main theory is that all these helicopters are operating as a sort of enclave unit that work as the remnants of the US government. Lydia the Tattooed Lady is like the Breaking Bad thing I mentioned earlier, only in a much more metaphorical sense. So in the series finale of Breaking Bad, which I'm not going to spoil it for you, but there's a scene where Walter White answers a phone that's ringing, and the ringtone is an old song known as Lydia the Tattooed Lady. This is also the song that it's shown Alpha sung to her child, which she named Lydia. Not only is this the same song being used on both shows, but again, not to spoil Breaking Bad too much, they both relate to the idea of villainy, or at least nefariousness in some sense, and an overarching theme of redemption. So the fact that Alpha named her child Lydia through the same song is this sort of correlation line seen between the two shows of the bad becoming better. Daryl alludes to Sophia is in reference to the fact that Daryl accidentally called it in season 2 episode 3. During the period of time where Sophia went missing in season 2 and the group was out looking for her, Andrea tells Daryl that she's probably dead, to which Daryl snaps back and said she's probably held up in a farmhouse somewhere, which, oh boy, was she. And it's just sort of a quick Easter egg that most people don't notice until their second time through the show. And also, just side note, the story Herschel gave about Sophia getting into the barn was totally stupid. Like, he claims Otis did it before he died, but Otis did not climb up there with a walker Sophia by herself and then flip her into the barn, and then everyone that like threw food to them afterwards didn't notice, or Otis never mentioned it. My theory is that Sophia was running to hide from walkers and then sought shelter in the barn, and then that's how she got bit, and would explain like her decayed state. Like, she got bit once and got away and turned, which is a depressing thought, but anyway. Walker decomp is the fact that as the show has progressed, the walkers have got more and more decomposed. Like, think about it this way. In season 1, they pretty much just look like people with sunken in eyes and pale faces. And then now you look in season 10, and the majority of walkers you find are skeletons with a little bit of hair on them. This calls back to the thing that Milton mentioned in season 3
they all look
of the
kind
show,
of the same.
where he said that the walkers do in fact starve, it's just really, really slowly. And as the show has gone on, the walkers have went from more agile and quick to slowly lumbering or just crawling in some cases. So this implies that one day the infection could end if the walkers simply die out, or at the very least are unable to move anymore. Which is probably the only hopeful theory on this entire iceberg, so let's change that. Rick is the villain. This is a different theory of how one could approach the show. Instead of looking at it as a story of survival, to look at it as a tale of downfall. Basically, it's like this. Rick's group has come across several other groups, and every time they've ended up killing them for the greater good. Now, in the beginning, this was always because they were attacked, and it was always a form of self-defense. But as the show went on, they got a lot more offensive with their defensive measures, to the point where whenever the group met the Saviors for the first time, they just got told by Hilltop, hey, there's these guys that are bullying us. So Rick just goes and kills a bunch of them. The idea is, from an objective point of view, Rick is the bad guy of somebody else's story. And the only reason that we view the group as the quote-unquote good guys is because we're familiar with them. And as the show has shown, Every character, even people like Negan, have a sympathetic backstory, and if we were with them from the beginning,
I mean,
we'd
it's not
probably
really
view
like
them
a
as our
fucking
protagonists.
theory. It's
so
just
maybe
like
not
a
so much that Rick himself is the
way to
bad
look at
guy,
it.
but that in this world, everyone's got to be the bad guy. And on that bright note, we are on to tier 4. Carol's comic book death is a thing I talked about earlier when I said some of the changes actually turned out kind of good. So remember how I mentioned that Dale and Andrea didn't die in the comics for a really long time but died early in the show? Well, Carol's the other way around. In the comics, Carol commits suicide by letting herself be bit by a walker. See, in the comics, her character is made to show the links of sorrow that someone can reach in this world. Like, she's not a great mother to Sophia, and she's very reliant on everyone, and she eventually takes her own life while also putting the group at risk. Whereas in the show, she's a sign of how much someone can rise to be within this world by learning to get over the death of her child and then becoming a strong warrior. This is very similar, I feel personally, to Norman Reedus and Daryl. The fact that they had a character that was initially going to be a quick throwaway, and then the show writers went, I think we may be onto something here. And I'm glad that Carol stuck around on the show. However, there is a second reason that she's on the iceberg at this point. Whenever she gets bit by that walker in the comics, she has the fastest turning rate I believe ever seen throughout The Walking Dead, becoming a walker in a matter of seconds after dying. On the show, it's incredibly varied how long it takes someone to turn, so the fact that we've never really been given a solid time frame, and in the comics, Carol turned after a few seconds, raises more questions about this disease, but yeah, we'll talk about it in a bit. You know what it is a cryptic line spoken to Morgan in season 6.
How healthy
Short
they are or
version
whatever.
is there is a prisoner at the hilltop that the whole gang is worried about who is eventually killed by Morgan's apprentice, Henry. This drives Morgan to a sort of madness because his whole spirit at the time was to never kill anyone, so it hurt him to see his apprentice take a life, especially at such a young age. So after this, Morgan begins seeing that dead guy telling him these phrases like "you were supposed to" and the phrase "you know what it is." Now, this has never been explained as to what that saying itself means. However, we do hear Morgan uttering those phrases to himself
I always
and
forget about
similar
him.
phrases whenever he's with Eastman. Eastman, you'll remember, is
forget when they
the
brought him
sort
back.
of guru guy who taught Morgan how to use a staff.
I think they
Now,
did, like,
in
a
my
few
opinion,
times.
you know what it is a conversation that Morgan has with himself, and this has
He
been
actually had, like, a
reaffirmed
pretty
by
cool
the
story.
actor who plays Morgan as a means of grounding himself in reality. That whenever Morgan sees these apparitions
other
around
shows
him,
has
he
seen a
tells
lot? I'm
himself,
not sure.
"You know it's not real. You know you're still here." You were supposed to, I believe, is in
Oh,
reference to what
right, he
happened
was the
to
character
Morgan's
that
wife
connects
and
the
his
two.
son. But similar to the telephone scene, this is another instance of a character having a supernatural
Jericho.
or
That was a cool show.
hallucinatory flashback sequence in which the character gains some manner of introspection. Keep your mind on that one. Beta is a celebrity means that Beta
I like this a
within the
lot.
show is a famous person. And no, not like
This is
the
like a more
actor who
recent
plays
one.
Beta.
This
Like,
is like-
Beta, the big whisper, is actually supposed to be a prominent figure within the world of The Walking Dead. Within the comics, it's said that Beta, before the apocalypse, was a famous basketball player who became a famous actor, so Michael Jordan. And it's implied within the show that Beta is a famous singer. This is also supported by the fact that one of the Whispers recognizes him whenever he sees Beta's face. And as another added Easter egg, there's a scene at Hilltop where they're listening to a record being sung by a country singer. The person singing on that record is Ryan Hurst, the actor who plays Beta. So within the show on The Walking Dead, they are listening
Interesting.
to a song that Beta recorded before the world fell apart, and now Beta is one of the Whispers they're fighting. Which it would be wild if you were in, like, the zombie apocalypse and then you rip off this dead walker person's face and it's Luke Bryan or something. Noah's death scene is the death of character Noah in season 5, episode 14.
I've watched most of it.
Now, a lot of people glossed over what was being
Once.
said between Noah and Glenn in his death, mostly because everyone, including myself, was just furious with Nicholas at the time. But if you'll remember, it's the scene within the revolving doors where Nicholas pushes his way out, allowing
Sometimes
Noah to be grabbed
begrudgingly.
by walkers, dragged out, and then killed in a very brutal on-screen death. In those final moments, Noah and Glenn are grabbing onto each other, to which Noah looks in Glenn's face and says, "Don't let go," before being dragged away and eaten by walkers. On the surface level, it just sounds like Noah was telling Glenn to quite literally do not let go of me before Glenn was overpowered.
There's
and
parts of it I do like.
However,
some that
in reading the screenplay for it, it's a lot more depressing than that. See, in the screenplay, Noah is the one who lets go of Glenn.
Yeah, it's pretty
and
hard
the
to get back
phrase
into,
"don't
honestly.
let go" was metaphorical to Glenn.
I'm more a fan of like
him
the
to just
atmosphere
be
stuff
strong
sometimes.
and brave out this world. So therefore,
I really
Noah's
don't like
death in that
the,
moment was a
the drama.
sacrifice play so that the door could be shut back and Glenn could survive. This would explain Noah's calm demeanor and tone whenever he says that
Like
phrase to
70,
Glenn. So now go back
80%
and
of
watch
the
that
show is,
scene,
like, not
thinking about that little
super
factoid,
enjoyable.
and try not to be sad. The actor Tyler Williams, who played Noah, actually collapsed crying on set
Yeah,
after
exactly.
they filmed that scene.
Like-
because he thought it was such a perfect way for his
Some
character
episodes
to go
are
out,
like certain characters.
sacrificing himself to make sure that Glenn could live. Tainted Meat
And
is
just
in
not
reference to
enjoyable.
that scene in season 5, episode 3, whenever Bob's leg is being eaten by the people of Terminus. Man, if you haven't kept up with the show until that
This
point,
show
that
is
had to be a
fucked up.
wild sentence to hear. But basically, Bob is attacked by cannibals and captured, and whenever he wakes up, they're eating his leg. To which Bob begins laughing and tells them that right before they grabbed, kidnapped him, and then cut off his legs, he had been bitten by a walker. And he began screaming the phrase "tainted meat," saying that now they're all going to become walkers because he was bitten. So this causes the Terminus group to freak out and launch an emergency attack to get revenge on Rick's group, and then Rick ends up killing all of them. So that means the question was never answered. Were they actually at risk of turning because they ate the quote-unquote tainted meat? According to Robert Kirkman, you cannot become infected in The Walking Dead by committing cannibalism against someone who was bitten.
No, that's
Again,
lame.
that's also a weird sentence out of context, but anyway. Meaning that the death of the termites and everything that happened to them was a complete farce. The entire tainted meat thing was meaningless, and even if unknowingly, Bob pulled a stunt fake out that caused the Terminus crew to be killed by Rick's group. Again,
Yo,
just another
Kiki.
interesting way to look at the show. Radio
that sub.
hallucinations is another one
Hey, it's
of
going
those
alright. Hope
sort
you're
of
doing well.
supernatural
Appreciate
moments
ya.
that takes place during Tyrese's death. So Tyrese sees several apparitions of previously dead characters come to him as he's dying, and the final one being the radio within the car that is reading out a news report. First of all, the voice in the radio that is talking is Andrew Lincoln, so that's interesting. But what's even more interesting is what the radio is saying. Tyrese hears the radio mention a village being attacked by night by machetes, children being killed in the streets, a burnt prison, as well as cannibal attacks. Now, in the real world, it's believed that this is audio from the Rwandan genocide. However, it has implications within the show, since all four of those things are things that Tyrese has seen the group do up until this point. See, the significance of the radio and the reason that the actual scene with it is so meaningful for Tyrese's death is earlier in the episode, Tyrese mentions that when he was a boy, his dad used to make him listen to the bad things or what the bad people were doing on the radio because it would make him tougher and more ready to face the world. And in his final moments, as Tyrese is hearing the radio, his last words are "turn it off," or essentially, he understands that the world's a bad place, but he wants off the ride. While a beautiful moment, it can also imply how Tyrese sees the actions that he's had to go through. Or in other words, all the events that we heard on the radio of these different attacks that our group has done, to him are just seen as more violence. And when put through that lens, it seems that Tyrese has had to live the life of the evil people on the radio that his dad once warned him of. So once again, on that very fun note, we are on to tier 5. Wolves Not Far is talking about the wolves. Remember them, the villains from season 5 and like half of season 6? They were hinted at beforehand whenever the group would come across graffiti as well as dead bodies with a W carved into them. And members of the wolves themselves have the W etched across their forehead. While never talked about that much in the show, it was confirmed outside of the show that the wolves' primary focus is one of primality. In other words, they're full and prim and believe that people should live without modern technological standards, and that the apocalypse was actually an escape from modern society. And therefore, humans should go back to their natural descendants or roots, i.e. wolves, and become more primal than they used to live. This is why they naturally come into conflict with groups like Sanctuary that try to live the way the world used to be. So in my opinion, the phrase "wolves not far" that we see graffitied around the show several times is in reference to the idea that the id or the shadow of you is never far behind. Or as the world gets worse, you have to become worse in order to match it. At the time in the show that this comes into play, it's particularly interesting because it's right before the fight with Negan. So wolves not far can be seen as a warning message to our characters that as they go into this battle, they're going to lose themselves. So another case of cryptic foreshadowing that a lot of people forgot about. Welcome to the Dog Trot. This is my favorite aspect of The Walking Dead and something that I wish they did more of. In season 4, episode 12, Still, which a lot of people hated, which is just a wrong opinion and I don't support it. Daryl and Beth are separated from the group and at one point go to a golf course so that Beth can get her first drink. Whenever they walk into the country club, there are several interesting things that they find that tell a sort of story. Upon walking in, they find the remnants of a survivor camp, as well as things like money and jewelry thrown all over the floor. And then past that, they find people in very fancy suits hanging from the ceiling. And as they keep going, they keep finding more, from a woman who's pinned up and dead with a sign around her neck that says "Rich Bitch," as well as several emaciated walkers that were stuck in the basement but all wearing very fancy clothes. The phrase itself, "Welcome to the Dog Trot," is graffiti that is seen on one of the walls within the country club. The idea is that all these little pieces are telling a complete story. A group of people, most likely those that worked at the golf course, rebelled against the rich or upper class that lived there. Hence the people hanging from the ceiling, hence the woman with the sign around her chest, etc. As well as the people wearing nice clothes who, it seems, made their final stand in the basement before they all turned. Even the little details, like the fact that there's only one bottle of peach schnapps left in the bar, implies that whoever was there beforehand tried to drink everything. It paints this picture that every place they went to have a story and everything is lived in. And like, being able to tell a story solely through its aftermath is so interesting to me, and it's things like that that I really miss and wish the show did more of. Morgan's Whispers is about the episode known as Clear from season 3. Whenever Rick meets Morgan again, the character who hadn't been seen since season 1. Morgan is clearly in a not okay state of mind whenever Rick meets him, and among the things that Morgan says is the fact that he sees people wearing dead people's faces. Now there's a popular theory,
I did like that episode where
this became the direct
they run into Morgan again
Whispers.
in between.
Not only
him,
because obviously
doing Fear of the Walking Dead stuff,
people's faces, whispers, blah blah
and he's
blah.
got like
but
a bunch
this
of traps
occurred
set up in
relatively
that,
quickly
like, main
to
street
whenever
of
the
that town.
Whisper showed up in the comics.
That was a
So
good
people
one.
joke that Robert Kirkman got the idea because he was like,
I
people
miss
wearing
sitting
dead people's
down with my
faces?
friends and watching
Haven't thought of that
shows,
before. It's also
like,
during
every
this
week.
time that Morgan says he hears things.
We haven't done it in
talking to
years.
him,
It was before the
or he
pandemic.
hears
But
these walkers
Walking
speak
Dead
to
was one of
him.
those shows we all used to like watch together. Like, we would actually
Hold on
hang
to
out
that
and
one
watch.
too. So remember how earlier I said we're going to talk about Frank Darabont storylines later? This is that part. So remember at the end of episode 1 how Rick crawled into the tank and he got the grenade and shot the walker that was holed up inside of the tank. What not a lot of people may have noticed is that walker was played by Sam Witwer, who, if you're like me and thought the face was really familiar but couldn't place where, he played Starkiller in the Force Unleashed video games. But not only that, he is another one of those previously mentioned actors who Frank Darabont was very close with and appeared in the movie The Mist along with Andrea, Dale, and Carol. So why did such a big actor have such a seemingly minor role? Well, the reason was the original plans that Frank Darabont had written for season 2 were very interesting. For example, he wanted to tell in one of the episodes of how Dale, T-Dog, and Andrea met in the city and got out. Among those, he wanted to show more decay of how the apocalypse started, starting with this National Guard soldier played by Sam Witwer. So in season 2, we were going to see a flashback of how the military was ordered to kill civilians,
I haven't seen all
how they
of
were
Clone Wars,
ordered to
but
quarantine
I've seen all
people
the
off,
Rebels.
and eventually got overran. With the final shot of this proposed episode to be Sam Witwer hiding inside of the tank as there's
T-Dog,
walkers
I
all
fucking
around,
hated T-Dog.
thinking about pulling the grenade pin to kill himself, and then setting the grenade up next to him before dying, which of course is the scene that Rick comes in on the tank and ends up taking the grenade, which, if you'll remember, is the grenade that saved the group's life whenever they left the CDC. So the reason a famous actor plays a walker that's seen in one episode is because he was supposed to get a whole lot more in season 2, as well as telling the entire story about that one grenade that saved Rick's life. Which, I don't care if the show canned that and it's not canon at all. That is how I choose to believe things went, and that's how I always will until I'm dead. Negan merch controversy is really stupid, like but I couldn't not mention it. There was a guy named Ian Lucraft who, I'm not doxing him or anything, he was very public whenever this all went down, who walked into a Primark in Great Britain. I don't know what Primark is. I don't think we have those in the States, but whatever. To which he went over to the Walking Dead section and saw a shirt that had Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo on it. Now, for those that know the show, Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo is the phrase that Negan uses whenever he's carrying his bat around. Actually, hold on. Whenever he's carrying his bat around. I forgot that I had this thing until I was literally talking just now and looked over and saw it propped up on the wall. Actually, it's probably good that I didn't remember till just now. I would have made a really cringy bit out of it anyway. So he saw a shirt with the bat that said Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo and complained that it was incredibly racist. So, you know the saying, Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, catch a tiger by his toe, if he hollers, let him go, blah, 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 that whole thing. What not a lot of people know is that the saying has very, very racist origins from like 1800s, like slavery times, but was changed almost immediately, and no one means it in a racist connotation at all. But as Ian said, quote, if I was black, and so, which, let me clarify, Ian is a white guy. It has nothing to do with him. To which Ian said, if I was black and saw someone wearing that shirt, I would know where I stood. Which, like, I feel like if you do that, you're the one being racist there. And I don't mean this in a whole, like, oh, people who notice social norms are the real racists. Like, not at all. But if you see a shirt with...
How is this a controversy?
This on it, and the phrase eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and you go, black people, like... How is that not way worse than what The Walking Dead was doing? Like, AMC didn't mean it in a racist context. It's not, it doesn't even have one until you add it to it. But he complained, so Primark took it out of their stores. To which Jeffrey Dean Morgan said on Twitter about the situation, people are so stupid. Which, yeah, they sure are. Entry question was something that popped up in season 4 that a lot of people kind of forgot about. We see that whenever the group meets new people, they ask them 3 questions. I didn't know that even how many walkers have you killed? How many people have you killed? And why? And while we're never told what answers the group are looking for, there are some ideas. Like, for example, if you were to ask someone how many walkers have they killed, and they're like, I don't know, I quit counting however many hundred ago, that guy's either really, really good to have on the team or really, really bad. And then how many people have you killed? For obvious reasons, because the group has killed 2, but according to them, it's always been a low number and for a reason that mattered, which is why the next question is why. Or in other words, to defend myself, to defend my family, etc. Whenever they ask Bob this on the show, he responds with, because she asked me to, which I feel is another acceptable answer. However, what a lot of people didn't pick up on is that the first time we hear those questions asked is back in season 3, where Jim, through the hallucination that Rick has in the telephone scene I talked about earlier, asked him the exact same thing. I think they're gonna end it with like a movie soon or something like that. He asked Rick how many walkers has he killed. He asked him if he's killed any people, and he asked him why he did it. So the proverbial questions that Ghost Jim asked Rick are the questions that Rick later used to ask people into the group.
Is the show Rick movies?
Sure does
that's what's
like
happening.
It's ghost stories, huh? Anyway, we are now on to tier 6, starting with Hyundai. So Hyundai ran a sponsorship with The Walking Dead.
Dude, I remember when this happened, and it was like, why is the Hyundai so clean all the time? And then, like, right at the end of the show, there's a commercial for the Hyundai. It's so fucking dumb.
Where they put several Hyundai vehicles in the show, and for 3 seasons they had that mint green car that was always in perfect condition. And even in the webisode that they did, The Oath, they pretty much tell the story of how the green Hyundai got to the group. What's interesting about it is since it's an advertisement and since Hyundai wants their car to look good, if a character is seen in a Hyundai, nothing bad will happen to them while they're in the car. Like, they can get out of the car and die, but there will be no blood spilled within the Hyundai, and the Hyundai will never crash. So you can watch the show, and every time that a character gets into a car with the slanted H on it, you can be like, all right, we're good for now. Dwayne Jones whiskey is from season 10, but again, I'm not going to spoil anything from the show. This is just something that's seen on camera. There is a whiskey bottle that has printed on the front of it Dwayne Jones whiskey. If that's familiar to you, that's because Dwayne Jones is the name of Morgan's son. This led a lot of people to theorize that perhaps Dwayne was alive, because we never see him die on the show, and we just know that it happened at some point between seasons 1 and 3. So people began to theorize that perhaps Morgan just went crazy and his son's going to see a revival within the show itself. This is actually a plot line that was done in the comics with Michonne, so it's not too far-fetched. However, in the episode, they actually talk about the whiskey bottle, not the name Dwayne Jones, but they talk about how old it is, and they're like, oh, this is 25-year-old whiskey, which means that wouldn't add up. And it was later confirmed by Robert Kirkman the reason they called it Dwayne Jones whiskey was not after Morgan's son, but after the actor Dwayne Jones, who was the lead role in Night of the Living Dead. So cool in concept, didn't really pan out. Still a neat little like visual Easter egg though. Picnic foreshadowing is in reference to the dream sequence that Rick has in the season premiere of season 7. In it, we can see the entire group together having a picnic party within Alexandria in Rick's imagination of what if everything was okay. Now this occurs immediately after Glenn and Abraham are dead. And within the scene, we see symbolism of a character snuffing out 2 candles in front of the two, which is obvious representation. However, there's a lot more subtle things if you start to look through the scene. I won't go through all of them because the original post is huge. But one original thing that someone pointed out is that all the napkins are different colors, and the different color napkins that people share can correlate to something. For example, Glenn, Abraham, and Sasha, all 3 have the same color napkin, which, oof. And they correlate things like the clothing or what food are on their plates to events and things that happen later in the story. And it's a huge post. I'll leave the link to it in the description because it is interesting, but man, there's a lot to comb through. The day will come is a shortened version of the phrase, the day will come when you won't be.
He said he wasn't going to spoil anything after season 9.
As people began to notice it more recently, but it essentially goes like this. In the finale of season 1, whenever the gang is inside of the CDC and it's about to blow up, they finally convince Jenner to release the doors and allow them to escape. As they're leaving, Rick shakes Jenner's hand and says, "We're grateful," to which Jenner replies, "The day will come when you won't be." The name of the episode in which Glenn and Abraham die and Rick nearly has to cut off Carl's arm and the group becomes enslaved by Negan is titled, "The Day Will Come When You Won't Be." And considering that was the beginning of the end for a lot of the characters, it's such a gut-wrenching moment that symbolically this would be the moment where maybe Rick thinks the whole thing was pointless to begin with. Anyway, Children of Terminus. This is another bright, cheery one. So there's a scene within Terminus whenever it's showing all the goods that they gathered from the groups that came in, where there's a table that's full of children's toys and other children paraphernalia. And if you look around Terminus, there's not a whole lot of kiddos. So termites eat babies. Johnny Depp's head. Okay, so in season 6, there is a part where they're getting a bunch of walker heads and trying to find one that looks like Gregory. And if you'll notice, if the one on the far right looks kind of familiar, that's because the prop department modeled it after Johnny Depp's head. Kind of just as a joke. They're like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we put Johnny Depp's head in the show as a severed zombie head? And, I mean, since that's Johnny Depp's head, you could canonically say that Johnny Depp died in the world of The Walking Dead, and there's his head now. What's even funnier is after they were done filming, Norman Reedus just took it. So somewhere in his house, along with like the beard shavings of Andrew Lincoln, is the severed head of Johnny Depp. So I want pictures. Carol Cookbook is another thing from season 10, but again, not really a spoiler, just something that's seen. For a brief flash, while Carol is not in the best of spirits, she sees a cookbook that features herself on the cover along with her five
Norman
dead,
Reedus just like walking out of the
children,
studio with them.
all 5 being kids that she felt responsible for the death of. This is uncharacteristically odd for the other hauntings or episodes that characters have within the show. Like, we've seen things like the telephone scene and people believing they're talking to dead loved ones, but to see yourself on a cookbook in this like Betty Crocker scene with dead children is odd. This is also at a point in the show when Carol is becoming very tormented. So another supernatural mention. Moving on, we are now on to Tier 7. Kirkman Try to Kill Judith is more of an ongoing affair. So there were apparently several times in the show where Kirkman kept writing in different ways to kill the baby, because he felt that this is a very savagely destroyed world and everything's awful, and it would be really good for character development to just kill the baby. Also, Judith died fairly early after her birth in the comics, so again, kill the child. However, the studio kept denying him time and time again. The reason there's so many times in the show where Judith supposedly disappears or it's unknown what happened to her is because these were instances of Robert trying to open the door to her death. Like in the season 4 mid-season finale, whenever Rick and Carl come to the bloodied baby carrier and they think Judith is dead, that's because that was another attempt of Robert to go to the studio and be like, see? I already killed her. Now it's going to be weird if I have to bring her back, so you should just let me keep her dead. He since said that this was a dumb idea, and he likes the character that Judith has become. But it's so funny that every time in the show that you watch it, and you're like, wow, did the baby die? Robert was really hoping that the baby died. Purple Shirt Walker is an interesting phenomenon that was seen in the early parts of the show. So specifically, the Purple Shirt Walker was one that was seen in Atlanta whenever Rick was stuck inside of the tank. It starts off as weird because the walker is sitting there inside of a burnout bus before getting up and then walking out onto the street and seeing Rick. However, unlike all the other walkers that are crowded around him and the horse, the walker just stands there, kind of back a bit, and stares at him for a while. This is entirely uncharacteristic, as what we know, walkers are just mindless cattle that follow noise and people wherever they go. Except for this one that just kind of watches. But if you'll remember in season 1,
I wish they like
that
did
wasn't
more
the
stuff
only
with
weird
something like
occurrence.
that. That'd be kind of
Remember
cool.
Morgan's wife,
Weird
who
zombies.
as a walker walked up to the porch and tried to open the doorknob? Or remember the little girl at the very first walker ever shown on the show who picked up her teddy bear? Even little things, like whenever they're stuck inside the department store, one of the walkers on the window is seen beating the
when was
window
the first
with a
episode
brick.
of
These are entirely
aired?
weird, uncharacteristic
2007,
things that we
2009?
never see later in the show. And even small touches, like all the walkers were faster then, whereas now they just kind of shamble everywhere. This implies that these
2010.
walkers,
That was
in
off.
some sense, have some form of memory. Like the Purple Shirt Walker just remembered sitting on a bus, so that's what he did as a walker. Morgan's wife remembered walking to that porch and opening the door, so that's what she did. And I know that like the official thing is like, oh well,
Yeah,
they
you're right. I
retconned
remember
all
the
that,
ads,
but that's
too.
lame. I don't like
It's
that.
like on
What I
buses
do
and
like
stuff.
is the idea that the infection has gotten worse over the time. But whenever it first started,
like Rick
people
on the
were
horse.
still in there, even if just a little bit. And it goes back to the question that not a lot of people have really asked of what really are the walkers. I See Red is the quote that Morgan used when talking about the death of his son in season 3. In a fantastic scene, he's describing what happened to Dwayne in saying that his wife, his zombified wife, who he didn't have the courage to kill before, came and killed his son, who also didn't have the courage to kill her. And when describing it, Morgan begins to scream the phrase over and over, I see red, I see red. Now, the phrase I see red, while here maybe in relation to blood, is often used to describe people in fits of rage. And also think about the logistics of it. Morgan is
they're
there,
supposed to
and so
have
is
like a
his
shorter
son.
memory
The
as
wife,
they decay. I
zombified
think,
wife,
though.
begins
Like
to
I think it
attack
makes
his
sense
son,
at first
to
if
which
some of
Morgan,
them were still
in
like
this state of anger, would
halfway
most likely
between. I
kill
don't
his
know.
wife. However, it seems
Then it, like,
totally
sets in
implausible
fully.
to me that right there she managed to totally consume
no
Dwayne
really, like,
or
consistent
kill
zombie
him to
lore.
the point of total death. What more than likely
In Walking
happened
Dead
is she
especially.
bit him once, and then during this rage state,
exactly, I
Morgan
think so, too.
realizing what he had to do killed his son. So the phrase I see red may just not mean the blood, it may quite mean that Morgan went into such a fit that he either beat, shot, or stabbed his son to death. which makes his fallout that he had after that all the more understandable. And perhaps the reason he swore an oath of never taking a life is because he took one in such a brutal way and one that mattered so dearly to him. Vados Gang is often forgot about.
I forgot about these guys.
But one of the cooler elements of the show that got brushed over. So remember in season 1, whenever Rick, Shane, Glenn, and Daryl went to Atlanta to get the bag of guns? And then there was a sort of Spanish gang that kidnapped Glenn for a while, before it turns out that the whole gang itself was just a group of guys who was protecting a nursing home who the workers left abandoned. Yeah. What happened to those guys? Well, in a deleted scene from the first episode of season 2, remember this is when Frank Darabont was writing, and in a scene you can completely find on YouTube, the group goes to the Vados Gang after the CDC explodes to get help. Once they get there, everyone's been murdered. And not just by walkers, although there are some walkers there, majority by people who have been executed with a gunshot to the head. Now, this is before any violent factions were seen in the show, so it leaves the question of who killed the Vados Gang. Well, in the Rise of Governor novels that I mentioned earlier, it said that the governor went to Atlanta in the time period that would have been while Rick's crew was also in Atlanta.
So the governor killed
now,
him.
while those
That's supposed to be like
novels are
foreshadowing
directly
the governor,
related
that
to
would make
comics
sense.
and can't always be applied here, I do think the idea of the governor making his way to Atlanta, because remember it was supposed to be a safe haven, still fits. So it's quite possible in the original script and in the original deleted scene that we had a hint of the governor before he ever came onto the show. And all the way back in what would have been season 1, he executed the nursing home in order to take their supplies. Something that we would find out later he wasn't opposed to doing. Axel's storyline was another one of those dark ideas that was theorized but they never went with. So remember Axel? He was one of the prisoners that Rick found within the prison who ended up being a friend of the group. Well, in the original script, he was supposed to be a sort of serial killer figure. He was going to stalk and periodically attack the group, and in the original drafts was going to kill Beth and brutalize Carol. The actor Lou Temple, who played
Legend
Axel,
of Zelda,
was
like,
told right
leather
before
armband
filming
on.
that we're going to lighten up a little bit. So instead of attacking Carol like that, you're going to have a relationship with her. Because the opening of season 3
That's a pretty
especially
weird
was very
mix-up,
dark
yeah.
in a lot of the instances and stuff that they
That's
showed.
cool, though. That's like
and
a
as
cool
previously mentioned with
change,
the
I
whole
think.
Lori skeleton, this was in the same vein of, yeah, we can't do that. And a lot of the times with characters like Axel, if it seems like a character was put on the back burner for a bit before immediately getting a story arc and then dying, that's because often with the writing, that's how it went. Speaking of cut ideas, Eugene had a cut scene during
What do you think?
his
Do you
stint
guys like
with the
Eugene?
Saviors. Specifically with the
I
character
hated Eugene
Laura.
at first,
Laura
and I
was
kinda
played by Lindsley Register,
like him a lot now, I
who
think.
said that one day before filming,
He's
she
kind
got
of
a call
annoying,
from
though.
her agent who said, "How comfortable are you with provocative situations?" And she said, "For The Walking Dead." Turns out there was an entire scripted, shot, and edited scene of Eugene and Laura getting it on. Now, this wasn't like a budding romance or anything. It was very clear through the screenplay that this was just more so an act of opportunity. However, that means somewhere out there on the internet is an entire scene of Eugene doing the deed in character, which that has got to be a conversation
What the
starter for
fuck?
sure. Carol killed the Andersons is yeah, probably. So remember the Andersons, it was the abusive husband and the wife Jessie, who would later become a love interest for Rick, as well as their two sons Sam and Ron. They were all held up inside of Alexandria whenever the group came there. Well, Jessie, Sam, and Ron were all killed during the Walker invasion of Alexandria. Specifically, Sam had a panic attack while moving through the horde and was eaten by walkers, to which Jessie was then killed, and then Ron attacked and he was killed. However, if you'll trace that line back, a lot of people forgot the reason that he was so traumatized and afraid of walkers was because of Carol. See, Carol would constantly scare him and freak him out with all these stories, and that's what started these fits of horror that he would have. And it was one of these fits of horror that he had while in the horde that got him killed. So through that chain of events, Carol is directly responsible for the deaths of the entire Anderson family.
There's no logical
and there's
reason
even some
Eugene
belief
didn't
that
get
this was
killed
on purpose.
immediately.
See, the entire time
I
she was
know,
at
right?
Alexandria, at least in the beginning,
I think the idea is
Carol was
what's his name
putting
was
on
protecting
a
him.
face in order to seem normal. However, as we saw in quick glimpses, she was
Abraham.
still the same
The guy-
Carol.
the
from
redhead
whole
guy
thing.
who died.
So Carol despised
America
the weakness
guy.
that she once saw herself as, and the idea is she purposefully traumatized Sammy and
What's his
others
name, right?
around her,
Abraham.
so that if a survival situation was ever to come into play, she would be the one to come out on top. This is similar to her killing several wolves as well as several Alexandrians during the wolf attack. So maybe the death of the Andersons was just another form of Carol's rapid and immediate social Darwinism. Walker Lori is a cutscene from season 3. So whenever that whole period of time happened after Lori died and Rick was just kind of out of it, there was another edited and entirely put together scene where he sees Lori just outside of the prison fence.
I always hated
and
Lori,
after
too.
going to her and kissing to her, he pulls back to find
Lori's
that
the
she is
fucking
in fact
worst.
a walker now. To which he freaks out, starts screaming and running around, and it's the whole thing. But similar to the Eugene
I'm
scene
sure
I
there
mentioned
is, nice.
earlier, there is an entire edited scene that you can find online of Lori standing there as a walker in her bride's gown, and Rick just losing his mind.
Lori
I
fucking
remember
sucked.
like back whenever
Every
season
time she
3
was
and
on the
season
show,
4
I
were
was like,
coming
"God
out,
damn it."
people would post screenshots of just the Lori Walker face and be like, season 5, Walker Lori confirmed, coming back from heaven. And we are now down to the final tier, tier 8. Amy's Walker is technically a comic fact. However, it was too cool not to mention here. So we all remember Amy getting bit and dying in the Atlantic camp. It was one of the first major deaths that took place on the show. However, Robert Kirkman confirmed in the comments that the walker who bit Amy is the same guy who shot Rick and put him in the hospital. And the timelines match up, because as we figured out in expanded media and other stuff around The Walking Dead, the infection had been there for a while and had just been covered up until the huge outbreak. So Rick gets shot, put in the hospital for a couple months, wakes up. In the meantime, that guy who got shot on the road gets taken somewhere, comes back as a walker, eventually meanders his way through Atlanta and bites Amy. Symbolically, it seems that this one guy was the end of both of Rick's lives.
She flipped the
His
car?
life
I don't remember that.
pre-apocalypse
What the
and
fuck?
the first life he was trying to build post-apocalypse, as this was the event that made the group leave the city. And I really wanted to do that for the show, like be able to be like, oh, it's the same one, they're wearing the same clothes or whatever. But the walker that bites Amy was played by Greg Nicotero, and that is not the same guy who shot Rick in the earlier scene, so close. Cut Maggie death is quite potentially a troll that was done by AMC. So everyone who watched the show knows about the season 6.
Actually, I always really liked Maggie a lot.
Hold on. It ended with Negan doing the eeny, meeny, miny, mo thing. And then finally he swings the bat down, but we didn't see who was killed until season 7. However, right before season 7 came out, a leak showed up online that showed the entire scene, only it was Maggie who was killed. And everyone's acting and it's a fully edited scene.
She always has reminded me of Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Bat. Now, according to some
Who I always
reports,
really liked.
so that no one would know, even the cast of who was chosen to
the
die,
name, and she looks
they
like her,
filmed
kind of.
that scene with everyone dying. Or in other words, they did every possible iteration, so even the cast members didn't know who was picked. Now, I'm not sure of the validity of that statement. They definitely filmed the Maggie scene because it showed up online. There's a theory that AMC leaked that scene on purpose just
Maggie
to throw
is
off
actually
the audience
still alive.
right
She's
before
like the
show
main
came out. Which raises a lot of questions about how they film
character,
scenes
kind of,
and
in
how they
some
keep
ways now?
secrets
Not really.
together, but
He's
moving on.
one of them.
The pharmacy sink is maybe the most brutal implication in the entire show. So remember the welcome to the dog trot thing earlier, the whole country club story that's told through the background?
I
this
love
is
that.
a much faster and much
People
more
would
brutal
go through all
version
that
of
to
that. In season
film,
6,
like,
episode
scenes that aren't
14,
actually in the
there's
show
a
or
scene
movie.
where Denise leaves Alexandria with Daryl to go explore and
Throat
get
is really bothering me
supplies.
today.
At one point, they come across a pharmacy, which on the outside is totally boarded up with walker hands all over the windows. Upon going inside, Denise gets to the bathroom, which has also been boarded up, and after breaking her way in, she sees a completely decomposed, like just bones,
That looks sick.
walker on the ground, along with the word hush written over the walls over and over again, and then a sink full of water with a baby shoe sticking out of it. So, similar as the country
What?
club, we can see the whole story. A woman who was held up in the pharmacy at the beginning of the apocalypse, and the reason we know it's at the beginning is because the walker has a cast on its leg, implying that whenever she was taken in, it had to be recent,
Really
around
weird.
the time that she had
what's up,
a
Strawberry?
cast applied.
Is that
She
right?
hides in this pharmacy with her
We doing
baby.
good?
but most likely due to the baby's crying,
Be a
it
good
keeps
stream.
attracting walkers, which is the reason for the blood on the windows. So she holds up in the bathroom, and after losing her mind because of the walkers outside and the fact the baby won't stop crying,
Eat the baby?
she fills up the sink and
Oh.
yeah, maybe the
I thought
most
she ate
brutal
it.
moment in the entire show, and the implications are horrifying. This would also be the only time in the entire TV show that we have actually
remember the,
seen a dead baby. Like,
Day of
yeah,
the Dead
kids
or Dawn
die
of the
on the
Dead,
show
the
all
remake?
the time, but
That was
we've
one of the
never actually seen an
grossest
infant.
baby
I mean, there's been times
zombie
that there's
things
been
ever.
implications that they have died, but like you see that thing shoo in the water, and it's wild to me that the darkest moment on the entire show was a 2-second shot. However, I will say for a
What's up,
zombie
Strawberry?
series,
Thanks again for the raid. Hope you had a
it
good
was pretty
stream.
cool. Season 4 Lucille implies that Negan may have been around a lot earlier than the group thought. In Season 4, there is a scene where Beth is separated from the group and comes across a lot of corpses. If you look at the shot lying near them, you can... Hold on. If you look at the shot, you can see lying near them is Lucille in the dirt next to their bodies. Now, I don't know how many people active in the area that the group may know who was running around with a barbed wire baseball bat, but it had to be like less than 10. And while you could say it's just an Easter egg, once again, that's lame. So maybe Negan's been in the shadows a lot longer. And
Honestly,
maybe
I have
their
no
crossing
idea.
paths later on was a sort of destiny that was always meant to be. 382,000
If there was like a million
is the
times
supposed
more
number
stuff like
of
that, though, the
people
show would
left
have been so much
alive on
better.
Earth. This is a very, very long math equation that people way smarter than me did to determine from little
believe
tidbits that were given throughout the show and
this is
comics
the
how many
Beatles
people
in
are left alive on
2022.
Earth. This was done using the starting point of the show began in 2010,
The
so they
new
said that's
Beatles.
when the apocalypse started, and from figures that Jenner gives of how many people died and how many people were supposed to be killed afterwards, and a bunch of stuff. They eventually got to the 382,000 figure, which, let me tell you, is like nothing. To put that into perspective, 382,000 is
Yeah, exactly. How many
0.005%
zombie games can you put
of the world's
barbed wire,
population
nails,
in 2010. But we can use
and
that
other
figure
bullshit
to get to
into a
another
bat.
cool fact. So it's said several
forest
times
even lets you
by
put,
like
like,
Robert
teeth
Kirkman
into
and
your
people who
axe
created the
and stuff
show
like
that the ratio of humans to walkers is about 1 to 5,000, which is a lot.
Seems to me like
so
that's-
if there's
and it's not like
382,000, just multiply
barbed
that by
wire bats didn't
5,000,
exist
and we can
before
see
that
that
shit.
there are about 1,910,000,000 walkers on Earth. Or in other words, about one PewDiePie sub count away from 2 billion zombies on the planet. It's especially interesting because there's a lot of questions about how many people still
Interesting way to
exist,
put
can
it.
humanity survive, and considering that catastrophic of a reset of the population, probably not. Shane's original death. We are into the good ones. So John
Also,
Bernthal
fucking
revealed in
Shane.
an interview after his departure from the show how the script originally called for the scene between him and Rick to go. So in the beginning, the episode plays out the same way we all know. Shane kills Randall, Shane manages to get
Look at
along
him
with
right
Rick,
there.
and
He's
the
like
rest of the
fucking-
group separated, yada yada. However, where it
Feeling like
changes
powder.
is in the scene where Shane is pointing his gun at Rick. In the original script, as Shane's pointing his gun at Rick, Rick throws his gun down and says he doesn't want to fight him. And Shane
Honestly,
keeps getting worse and worse and
Shane
amping up
kinda
Rick
ruined
over
John
and over
Bernthal
until eventually
for
he
me a
just
little
starts
bit
saying
sometimes.
really
What was he
evil,
in
vile
recently?
stuff to him, and in a fit of
The
rage,
fuck was he just in,
Rick
like,
stabs
past
Shane.
year?
So while Rick is there mourning and having his emotional moment, Shane turns. So Rick grabs Shane's gun, points it at him, pulls the trigger, and the gun clicks. Or in other words, the gun that Shane was using was never loaded the whole time. The implication being Shane became so distraught with the way everything was going,
Yeah, I know he's
with the
kinda
fact
sure about it. I thought he was in a
that he loved
movie,
Lori
a
but he
show or
couldn't have
something I
her,
saw recently.
and he wanted to be Carl's
Oh, yeah,
father,
he was in the
but
Tony
couldn't.
Sopranos movie.
And in one act, Shane wanted
That
to
was
both
really a
die
weird
and
casting
make
for
Rick
me.
take up the helm of the group.
That's
so
what it was.
Shane, never intending to harm Rick at all,
Because like the
provoked
dad
Rick
in the
to point
flashbacks
of
is like
killing
a
him because Shane couldn't
overweight
do
New
it
Jersey
himself.
man.
I absolutely
And then in
love
the
this
movie, he's
theory.
fucking John
I've always saw
Bernthal.
Shane as one of the better complex characters written on the show. Because in the beginning, Shane didn't do anything wrong. He was looking out for his friend's family, he thought his friend was dead, and he fell in love. And the fact that his friend was alive just complicated everything he was feeling, and he just spiraled from there. To have that be his final death, that he never intended to harm Rick, but he just wanted off the ride, and he wanted Rick to take up the mantle, I see as so much more profound. The name of the episode in which Shane dies is Better Angels. And I've always imagined, like ever since I figured out about this theory, it was the idea that Shane couldn't be the guardian for the group anymore, so he had to pass that on to a better angel. And it's just one of those examples of something that I really, really wish they kept, because it makes a lot of what happens so much more impactful. The Lone Walker is a theory that a lot of people came up with online after the reoccurrence of a season 2 scene. So in the season 2 episode 12 Miles Out, whenever Shane and Rick are on their way back home after the whole fiasco with Randall and the fight that Shane and Rick got into, Shane looks out the window to see a totally alone walker walking through an open field. Now, this is uncharacteristic for a walker to not be in a horde, but that's not entirely out of the normal. Like, some of them can be on their own sometimes. But its behavior of just standing there still's a little odd, and a lot of people took more symbolism in it. So that was season 2, right? The walker showed up in the season 5 opening credits and stayed there through season 9. So that's really weird. They take this random shot from season 2 and then put it on 4 other seasons. But why? The theory is the Lone Walker is a symbol of our own Lone Ranger, Rick. After we see the fight between Rick and Shane, Shane looks out the window and sees a walker by himself alone in a field. What? And then as Rick begins to amp up the power and become more and more vicious, we see that same walker in the opening title. The idea is that Shane saw Rick for what he really was before everything else came to be. Or essentially the idea that Rick could be that bigger man. He could be that fighter. The idea that Walker and Rick are interlinked somehow. So, following the theory, the idea is that will be how Rick ends on the show. Either completely by himself and alone, or a zombified Walker, again left alone, as the last survivor of the core group. And even though he's gone off the television show, there's still the movies. So the idea is that at the end of the movies, we will see Rick take over as the Lone Walker. And then finally, the whole world is haunted. This was a line that Tyrese said to Carol several seasons back that has always stuck with me. Ever since Tyrese said it, it's made me rethink what the series is. There are a lot of references to religion and God throughout the series of the show. Not only do you have characters like Herschel and Father Gabriel who constantly
that looks
God,
dope.
But there are ideas of prayer, there are ideas of heaven and hell, and everything else. So even if mentioned in like the way background, there's an implication of the spiritual. So speaking of the spiritual and the matter of human souls, what happens to people when they die? And I don't mean that like in the real world in religion or whatever. I'm talking about on the show. Whenever someone gets bit, do they die and does their like soul leave their body and then just whatever this space spore or infection or whatever it is just take over the body that was theirs and walk around? Maybe. But then how do you explain stuff like Morgan's wife as a walker? How do you explain the purple shirt walker? It's like these things have these glimpses, these quick flashes of what life used to be like. Which, side note, I really wish was an element they kept in the show. But it implies that somehow, some way, there's someone still in there. And these people, in whatever regard they are alive, if you could call it that, they are these helpless passengers as whatever this thing is controls their body and makes them do the things they do. So whenever I think of walkers, whenever I think of these creatures are on the show, I quite literally see them as walking souls. These people permanently trapped inside of these husks as their own purgatory. It's as if they're stuck there and aren't allowed to leave the earth. But it's not only the people that become walkers. You know all those like spiritual things that I mentioned earlier in the video, and I've been like, oh, keep in mind that and that. Well, this is what I mean. Things like the telephone scene where 4 characters who have all died and not turned to walkers, they've all completely died, speak to Rick. Or Carol seeing the visions of her kids through a cookbook. Or Morgan being taunted by the guy who he was supposed to keep his apprentice from killing. It's not just the walkers who are trapped as souls on Earth. It's everyone. There is a line Herschel mentions in season 2 when quoting the Bible, when he talks about how one day heaven will be locked up and the dead will walk the earth.
I mean, it's interesting because like in Zomboid, you could set the zombies
whatever
to
little bit is left of people.
I think it's 3 things.
One, corpses, and that even after they die,
like completely
they're still
stupid.
On Earth, still speaking.
2, they have
to
basic
our main
navigation. They know how to jump
for
over
whatever
fences.
reason. It seems heaven's
And
locked
3,
up.
they can
and
like open
everyone
windows
is
and
forced to
doors
forever
without
wander
breaking
the
them.
earth.
They can just like
and
open
thinking
them.
about this
Like,
stuff,
so,
it makes lines like Glenn telling Maggie, "I will find."
I think in
you
28
before he
days
dies
later,
so
can't the
much more
zombies open
profound.
doors?
And all of these supposedly crazy coincidences,
just by turning the
like the
torn up?
governor killing the Vados
Forget
and then
which
becoming the group that
lore
Rick
that's
fights, or Negan's bat being found with the group all the way back in season 4, only to then run into them later. And it's like all of these interactions are guided by some means. When Rick says the line to his group in season 5 that they are the Walking Dead, I think he meant it. Either being stuck in your own
I think that's too
decomposing
much.
body, or stuck to walk the earth and communicate through those who will listen however you can. It seems as if no one's allowed to leave this purgatory. Think about people like Morgan saying the dead talk to him, or even the Whispers who say if they listen that they can hear the walkers speaking to them. And I want to clarify, I never want this to become a main drive. I never want the show to be like, oh, they're all ghosts. It's just something cool that I think about when watching the show that I apply to everything. I think maybe Tyrese is right. I think the whole world's haunted, which in my opinion makes the show
this is just a
so
theory.
much more terrifying.
I
But
don't think
it's a horror series,
it's just a dumb
and
theory.
that's
It's a
how I
funny
like
one,
it.
man. I like
and
it.
speaking of liking it, I hope
definitely
that you
not
like
like
that
Lost.
because that's the end of the iceberg.
It is in some ways,
and I hope you
but not in
enjoyed.
that way.
And thank you for watching. I haven't done an iceberg about a topic like this ever. I don't think they're all like.
Yeah, this is a
not
weird one. I
things
like that when
related
Dagoon
to
did this
media. They're
though.
just,
Like everything else is like
movies in
conspiracies and stuff
general,
like this,
or
but,
like these serial killers or conspiracy theories or
yeah.
whatever. Like this is the first time
I like
have
this one.
made a iceberg about an IP.
And I'm playing
But
the
it's something
zombie
that I
game
like,
right now,
obviously,
so
if you couldn't
I don't
tell
know,
by the
kinda
way I
like
talked about
zombie
it,
show right
especially
now.
at the end. Especially how it used to be. Like the early show was so good, and I loved it so much. And
I actually like
I
the
know
more
people
recent
say,
arc
like,
with the
later
alpha and
seasons are
beta
also
people.
Good. I haven't really.
What were
checked
they
them
called?
out. Just because
And the
like
Sigma?
I really love what it used to be. But I am glad that
On
I was
YouTube?
able to cover this. I'm glad I have a YouTube channel now.
That
I can
first
talk
half of
about
the
this
season
stuff
was good,
and that
but
you
then the
all are out
second
there
half was
listening,
so boring.
and it means a lot. So thank you all so much.
Oh yeah,
for
we've
watching.
watched
I hope
Urbex
that you
stuff a
enjoyed.
bunch. Proper people.
Like I said, this was the first iceberg I built myself.
I'm a little
I
bored
cared
of
about it. I wanted this
Urbex
to
right
go
now
a
though,
certain
for
way.
some reason.
Especially because it's just, it's something I grew up with. It's something I enjoyed. It's something that really got
I've
me
watched
into
a lot of
horror.
it.
Like The Walking Dead was very instrumental in
Yeah, I
like
like
my
Wendigo.
ideas of creepy television, I guess.
Good guy.
And I've always loved the series, and especially with that last theory, the way I've always viewed the show, it always made it that much more creepy to me.
Here's a link to that video if you want to check his channel out. I would recommend him. He's been. We spoke about this guy just like a few months ago, and we were like, "Oh, Wendigoon," and then I think ever since then I've watched all his videos like several times. Some of it's not for me, but I like the format. You can kind of just put this on in the background and sit down and pick up right on some fact. You know what I mean? Fact, I say, but you don't have to watch the whole thing. Essentially, you could just sit down at any time, pick it up, leave it off. Oh yeah, I'd really recommend his channel. Let's do. I think I might play some Zomboid. I might play a little Zomboid. Have you guys heard of this nurse channel? I'd recommend this one for Zomboid videos. We'll watch a couple Zomboid videos since they keep popping up in my Ricks. Like this one I didn't actually know until recently.
Did you know that players can shoot while driving in Project Zomboid? To perform a drive-by, you'll need to equip a gun. Players can use a pistol, shotgun, or rifle to pull this off. Make sure to
Yeah,
stock
she has
up
a
on
nice
ammo
voice.
and have a vehicle ready. While sitting in a car, hold V to open the context menu and select Open Window to roll down the window. From here, you can right-click to aim your weapon and left-click to shoot. Drive-by shootings are an effective way players can train their aiming skill.
I like the editing too. They're really short. To perform a drive-by. Bow, bow. I should just put on the playlist of the jobs.
Did you know that in Project Zomboid, being unemployed is the most flexible and versatile occupation in the entire game? Each job has its own advantages in the form of skill
If you haven't
bonuses
played
and
this,
unique traits.
I
If
think
you
this
choose to
sells
be
it.
unemployed, you'll spawn in a small house or trailer with both strength and fitness at level 5 and have 8 free points to spend on traits. These traits can be very beneficial, like being faster or stronger, and other bonuses that might save your life. Being unemployed is a great starting
I haven't
occupation
really
for new
rolled as
players or
unemployed
anyone
many
looking to
times.
create their own custom character build. In Project Zomboid, the fire officer occupation can make the start of the game a lot easier, especially for beginners. Players with fire officer characters can carry more and run faster for longer periods of time. The extra strength and fitness bonuses you get from it will also give you an advantage in combat. Get your hands on an axe and enjoy
Starting off
the
with a
free
fire
skill
coat
boost
is
you
pretty
get
good,
from
too. They
chopping
actually
down the
start off with a
undead.
coat.
The sprinting multiplier is great too and can come in handy for those quick getaways. Pair either the
airplane
strong or
safety
athletic
video.
trait with a fire officer and you've got yourself an axe-wielding killing machine. In Project Zomboid, the police officer occupation is a great choice for players that like to play with guns. Picking the police officer occupation will result in negative starting points, requiring you to take negative traits to balance it out. If you're looking to shoot down hordes of the undead, police officers start you off with high skill bonuses towards aiming and reloading. This means that players will be able to shoot more accurately and reload faster. The additional nimble skill boost is also useful when it comes to combat, as it affects how fast you can
nimble is
move while
really
in a
useful.
combat stance. Did you know that in Project Zomboid, the park ranger occupation can move the fastest through trees? Being chased by a horde of zombies, park rangers can just head into the woods and easily shake them off. At the cost of 4 negative starting points, this job is great for players looking to survive deep in the wilderness. With skill bonuses for foraging and trapping, you'll always find food in the wild. Plus, being handy with an axe will help keep the zombies away. Rangers also have a carpentry multiplier to make building and barricading that cabin in the woods a lot easier. Did you know that the construction worker occupation has the highest weapon skill boost in Project Zomboid? At the cost of only 2 negative starting points, you begin with 3 levels in short blunt, which is one of the most common weapon types in the
the
entire
construction
game.
worker's good,
You
the
get a
carpenter
whopping
sucks.
125% skill boost with short blunt weapons, making it the fastest weapon type to level up and master. Construction workers get a carpentry skill multiplier and can quickly gain XP from building things. Pick up this profession if you want a melee combat-focused character, or just like hitting things over the head with a lead pipe. Did you know that the security guard occupation doesn't need much sleep to function in Project Zomboid? At the
Security
cost of
guard
2
actually
negative
is a good
starting
one.
points, players gain the Night Owl trait. This helps players sleep less by recovering from fatigue at a faster rate and reducing the amount of hours spent sleeping. They also get a skill boost in sprinting and light-footed, which means that players can traverse areas quickly and quietly, all while being able to avoid combat in a pinch. Give a security guard the Wakeful trait and some fatigue-reducing vitamins, and you can easily go hours with little to no sleep. Did you know that in Project Zomboid, the best occupation for base building is the carpenter? They
Well,
begin the
six
game
at
with 3
fucking
levels in
go
carpentry,
something.
giving players a head start on base building from day 1. Carpenters can quickly construct stronger structures
Like
that are
your
harder
first
for zombies
character
to
you roll
breach.
might
This
be
makes
good
it
as a
easier for those
carpenter,
who want
but
to
then, like,
secure
if
a
you get
base
bit,
as
you
soon
can
as
come back to something
possible
else at
and
least.
begin building defenses for it. Players will also be able to craft rain collector barrels early in the game. The extra skill boost carpenters get in short blunt weapons makes hammers and other common tools very effective against
Against what? All right, I'm gonna play some Zomboid. It's time. Time for the Boyd. Hold on one moment. Man. Why is this not working? Hold on a second, guys. I'm going to put a song on maybe for a minute. Ah, there we go. There we go. If you're interested, there's a whole playlist. But here's a link to one of the videos. Appreciate it if you check it out. Probably be uploading a lot of Zomboid stuff there. I'm playing a lot. So if you want some chill stuff to listen to, check it out. All right, let's watch some TV. This channel, I love their animation too. Boom, boom.
This didn't happen to me, but to my sister.
Love this guy.
She was home alone, and I was out at the mall with a friend. I called her to ask what t-shirts she wanted from the store I was at, and she told me she was scared that there was a ghost in the house.
It reminds me of like
I asked her what happened.
That Australian Rick and Morty
She had put a hot
cartoon
pocket
that they put
in the
on Adult
microwave
Swim
and gone
for
into
like
her
an
room
April
to
Fool's joke.
change. While she was changing, she heard the microwave go
Oi,
off,
Marty!
signaling that her hot pocket was done. We have a small house. The kitchen and the living room are open and connected, and her room opens to the living room. She comes out of her room to grab
Yeah,
the
what
hot
about that
pocket,
hot pocket? That looks
but instead
delicious,
of it
right?
being in the microwave, it was out in the living room coffee table, all warmed up. If that happened to me while I was alone, I would have been out there so fast.
I would have been out there so fast. Okay.
I was a utility locator. I used to work on a team with my dad. To find a gas service from the gas main to the house, you must connect the equipment at the gas meter.
Oh, okay.
Many
that's how it
older
works.
homes have the gas meters in the basement. Sometimes I would be the one that would connect the equipment while my dad found the gas service.
Find the gas service.
On this particular day, we get to a house that had the meter in the basement. I go up, knock on the door, and the homeowner points me in the direction of the stairs to the basement. I go down and I see the gas meter in the corner with two walls built around it, making it like a closet with no doors. Behind the gas meter is the old crawl space, halfway up the cinder block wall. No lights in the crawl space. As I step into the closet area, I hear what I can only describe as a demonic growl coming from the crawl space. I step out and call my dad, not wanting to sound spooked. I just say I need a flashlight. He hung up. I stood outside of the doorway and just reached in to hook up the equipment. My dad comes down the stairs
It's
with
like a
flashlight,
fucking eldritch monster.
and as he steps through the door to see if I got it in the dark, that same demonic growl comes from the crawl space. He about knocks me over trying to get back. He hands me the flashlight and goes back outside. I just stood there pointing the flashlight into the crawl space with a feeling something was watching me.
What?
He calls and says that he's done. I grabbed the equipment
I'm
as
done.
quickly as possible and got the heck out of there. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a dog or raccoon or anything I've ever heard of before or since.
Okay. Sure.
One time when I was 12, my best friend at the time and I were having a sleepover at her house. As a visual, the house was pretty old and was filled with tons of antiques and old furniture. She lived at her grandmother's house. The basement was one of those where you wouldn't dare go down alone because it just felt off and spooky. Because we were spooked by the basement, we decided it would be fun to sleep in a very long hallway on the 3rd floor. On opposite sides of the hall for some reason. The whole night before bed, we were playing a game where we would pretend to be spies. So we would hide in the closets and sneak up on her mom and grandma. I was often homesick at sleepovers as a kid, and when it was time for bed, I just read my book by a nightlight on my end of the hall.
What?
Then, right across from me, I see my friend get up and run towards me. Innocent me says, "Are we going to play spies again?" No response. I just giggle, and I'm excited to play again. So, I follow the figure into a bedroom closet and close the door.
Why would you do that?
I'm trying to communicate with her, but she's not answering.
So
I look over to where she is supposed to be beside me, but no one is there. I decide to leave the closet because I couldn't fathom what just happened. I walk across the long hall and saw that she was fast asleep this whole time. I could never sleep there ever again, and I'm still really spooked by the fact that I ran into a closet with a mysterious, ghostly figure.
Mysterious, ghostly figures. I'll try another. The new Dr. Bob. The fuck is this?
The young woman looked again at her map, turning it this way and that, trying to figure out which way she should be going. "Excuse me, sir?" she calls out to a passing man, but he pays her no mind. A woman walks past and stops when the woman tries her hand at the local language.
I like this song.
Bud,
This,
Laska? Da? The woman asks her.
Da?
Vi, rozmovlejete?
Da?
Angliskoju? Yet, the woman replies before continuing on her way. The young woman feels that this is hopeless. Outside of a few phrases like hello, goodbye, and where is the bathroom, her local language skills are sorely lacking.
Yeah.
She's still at the beginning of her grand trip of Europe that saw her starting on the eastern side of the continent with the plan to travel westward and finish her journey in Paris. She's traveled a bit before, but here in this Ukrainian city, she's realizing that she may be out of her comfort zone. This trip is very important to her, though. After her parents were killed in a car wreck, she was paralyzed with grief and barely left her room for months. She decided that she needed to get away and give herself a clean break from everything back home. And so she decided to do what her parents had done when they were her age and backpack across Europe. All of the pictures from their trip showed the two of them together, smiling and happy in front of great landmarks. But here she was, alone, scared, and unable to even find her hostel. "Sir, can you help me?"
Yeah,
she cries to another passing man, waving her map towards him. But he too ignores her pleas. The young woman zips up her jacket. It's getting late, and the setting of the sun is accompanied by a cold breeze. She looks up and down the city street, and even though there are still plenty of people around, it feels as though all she can see are unfriendly faces. Her face lights up when she spots something, though. It's a police officer. He'll be able to help her. The young woman runs towards the police officer, who is standing near the side of the road, or at least she thinks he must be a police officer. His gray uniform looks a little old-fashioned, but it's neat and well-fitting, and he's holding what appears to be a baton used for directing traffic.
Oh, shit.
The young woman approaches the officer, but his back is to her as he gazes out towards the street.
Un-London.
Unsure of what else to do, she reaches out with some hesitancy and taps the man on the shoulder, causing him to wheel around to face her. He stares at her without speaking. Do you speak English? The young woman asks. Yes, little, he responds in a thick Ukrainian accent. Oh, thank goodness. You have to help me, please. I'm completely lost and I don't know what to do. As people continue to walk past her without giving any notice, she goes on to explain that after arriving in the northeastern Ukrainian city, she took what she thought would be the right bus, but ended up going in the completely wrong direction. Now she has no idea where she is, and is worried she won't make it to her hostel before night falls. Where is your hostel? The policeman asks. Somewhere called the... She looks down at the
She,
words
like, go
scribbled
into
on the
another
margins of her
dimension?
map. The student
What's up,
Skya?
Strawberry?
She tells
This
him.
is the raid?
Ah, yes, the police officer says. There are many
Hope you're
hostels
doing good.
there,
Hope you had a
including
good
some
stream.
specifically for foreign visitors and students. She has been very unlucky, though, since it was actually near the metro station she first arrived at. He can help her get there, though. There is a bus that will take her straight there, and the stop is only a few blocks away. He can walk with her there if she likes.
Don't do
The
it.
young woman accepts his kind offer, and the two start heading down the sidewalk together. As they walk, he asks what she is doing in their city, and she explains how she just needed to get away and see the world. She's unsure why, but she feels like she can confide in this policeman, and she begins to explain what happened to her parents, how alone she felt at home, and how this trip is meant to be a life reset, but so far, it's off to a terrible start. We have phrase, he tells her. Sigda moja boitoja. What does that mean? She asks. It can always get worse. This way. The police officer points towards an alleyway and starts walking towards it. He can tell the young
Reminds
woman
me
is
of a guy I
feeling
used to work
apprehensive
for.
about entering the dark space between the buildings, and he assures her that it is a shortcut. There's nothing to be afraid of. The two walk into the alley together. The young woman again starts telling him about her life back in the United States, what she plans to do when she gets back, how she hopes the trip will be a turning point for her. As she talks, she fails to notice that the police officer has begun to slow. She does notice, though, that the shadow of the police officer has suddenly started to stretch out on the ground in front of her. She stops and watches as the shadow keeps moving, growing larger and larger. It stretches and lengthens, even as hers stays the same. She also realizes that the sound of the policeman's footsteps have also stopped. She slowly turns to see it standing in the place where the police officer should be. A grotesque, horrible sight. A massively tall creature with long, disgusting limbs. She's too scared to scream as she continues looking up its gigantic body before finally looking at its face, or what's left of it. Half of its jaw hangs unhinged, as if it has been torn from its joint, and it has no ears or nose. She trembles in fear as she wonders if whatever this thing is can see her,
The fucking
since it also
bone
has no
shaking
eyes.
sound effect.
The last thing she sees before she turns to run is the creature lifting up one of its arms, where its hand has been replaced by a black and white metal rod that it brings down with terrifying speed and crushes her skull. Privyt! Today's file exploration has taken us to Ukraine, though the anomaly known as SCP-1366-RU has been known to appear in a number of other countries as well.
I've never heard of this.
SCP-1366-RU is a humanoid creature that, from what the SCP Foundation has been able to observe, appears to be sapient and resembles a police officer, or militia, from the 1970s Soviet Union. It wears a long, dark gray coat, tall black leather boots, and a cap, and holds a black and white baton reminiscent of the type used by police officers in Russia and many Eastern European countries to direct traffic. When an individual begins interacting with SCP-1366-RU, they will find that they feel as if they are talking to a regular police officer and having a completely normal conversation. It is capable of exerting a mental influence over the person speaking with them, allowing it to easily mislead and deceive them, which explains why they ignore the fact that the officer is wearing a uniform that is several decades out of date. Those who
God
pass
damn it, my
by will not
microphone
seem
just
to
fell
notice
over.
the anachronistic clothing either, and they will pay no mind to what is happening. This same effect extends to those viewing SCP-1366-RU on a live feed, and it is only when recordings are viewed that its true form is revealed. SCP-1366-RU's actual
It's just
appearance
like a Russian
is that of a
Sunderman,
mummified
kind
human
of.
corpse, though it is taller than any human at over 5 meters in height, with arms and legs that are disproportionately long, with the legs alone making up 2/3 of its total height. SCP-1366-RU is also extremely skinny, even for a desiccated cadaver, and its limbs and head look as though they are nothing more than brown, dry skin stretched directly over bones, with no muscle at all underneath. Its left hand appears to be missing, and in its place, the creature has a black and white rod fused directly into its arm. 1366-RU's face appears as though it has suffered tremendous injuries. Its eyes, nose, and ears all look as if they have been removed
Like
from
a
its face,
alien kinda.
and the left half of its lower jaw hangs freely in its joint, as though it were torn away. Despite this damage to its face, it is still quite capable of speech, at least when people are perceiving it in its human form. It's currently unknown why, but SCP-1366-RU appears to be primarily interested in kidnapping and killing people who are in countries that once belonged to the former Soviet Union. So far, there has been no commonalities between the victims except for one thing. All of their parents were dead at the time of their abduction. Once the Foundation realized this uniting factor, they were able to create a scenario in which the anomaly appeared, though so far, this has only been successful one time. Foundation researchers located a member of Class D personnel who was an orphan, D-1935, and equipped them with a radio headset, a video camera, and a microphone, and instructed them to walk the streets of a city located in a country which was once part of the USSR. The D-Class was observed on location by members of MTF Eta-10, nicknamed See No Evil, and they watched as D-1935 suddenly stopped on the sidewalk. He was approached by a police officer with an out-of-date uniform who saluted the D-Class with his right hand. Eta-10 appeared to not see the police officer and reminded the D-Class to stay sharp and continue looking for 1366-RU. The police officer spoke to the D-Class, though only in mumbled, broken words, as if something had rendered him unable to speak. The recording equipment captured the D-Class seeming to have a one-sided conversation with the policeman, where he insisted that he wasn't lost and that he was actually out walking with his mother. Or rather, he thought he was out with his mother. It seemed to the D-Class that she had just left, and he requested the police officer's help in finding her again. The officer then took the D-Class's hand and began leading him away, eventually taking him into a dark alley.
Don't do it.
All the while, Eta-10 seemed completely oblivious to what was going on. They didn't even realize that D-1935 had left until the two disappeared into the alleyway. They began searching the area, but they were unable to locate the D-Class anywhere. It was as if he had been there one moment and then simply disappeared. Luckily, D-1935 had also been equipped with a GPS tracking beacon, but when Eta-10 looked at their locator, they were convinced something was wrong, since it showed that the D-Class was now over 5,000 kilometers away.
What the fuck?
A nearby containment team was sent to the location being broadcast from D-1935's tracker, and they arrived roughly 2 hours after his disappearance. When they got to the location, they discovered that it was coming from a very strange place, a cemetery. The team cautiously entered the cemetery and began making their way in the direction of the beacon, unaware of what they would find. When the GPS locator finally signaled that they were in the correct position, they realized that they were standing directly over a grave. Specifically, a grave belonging to the mother of D-1935, who had been dead for over 50 years.
What?
There was no question, though. This was the location the beacon was broadcasting from, and after receiving permission from the Foundation, the containment team began to dig. When the coffin was finally revealed, the team readied their weapons, unsure of what they might find inside. But when they opened its lid, they saw that their guns weren't necessary. All that was found within was the mummified body of a woman. That and the body of D-1935, who was curled up in the fetal position, tightly hugging the remains of his mother. Following this event, the parents of other suspected SCP-1366-RU victims were exhumed as well, and in each case, the missing person's body was found inside, alongside their deceased mother or father. SCP-1366-RU, which has been given the nickname Uncle Styopa, a play on a popular Russian children's character, who is an extremely tall policeman, has so far eluded all containment attempts, and it has been classified as Euclid. Disappearances of those without living parents in former Soviet Union countries should be investigated to determine the involvement of SCP-1366-RU. Any recording devices in the area where they disappeared must be checked, and should they contain any images of SCP-1366-RU's true form, then they are to be immediately confiscated and destroyed.
Why?
Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-1098-RU, the Theater of Living Puppets, for
He's
another
actually, like,
anomaly
hanging
from the
out with
Russian
him? What the
SCP
fuck?
Foundation. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single anomaly as we delve further and further into the SCP Foundation's classified archives.
Dr. Bob is definitely an SCP. No doubt about it. Bum, ba, bum, 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 bum. There was a new Mr. Ballin that was pretty cool. This first story
video is brought to you
is really interesting. Hold on. Dr. Bob.
In 1957,
This is Mr. Ballin.
31-year-old Larry Bader
The story
was
is
living with
really,
his wife,
really
Mary
crazy.
Lou, and their 3 kids in Akron, Ohio. Larry was a good father and good husband, but he was a terrible businessman. Over the past several years, he had launched several new business ventures, and they had all failed, throwing the family into fairly significant debt. And so even though Larry desperately wanted to be an entrepreneur and eventually start a quality business, they didn't have the money to do that. And so he had to just take some job in order to pay the bills. And so the job he got was a cookware salesman for a local company, and it did pay the bills, but it did not make Larry happy. And so on the weekends when Larry
I don't know
was
if I
not
believe this
working,
story,
and if it was okay
like
with his
the actual
wife,
premise.
he would basically just disappear and go fishing on Lake Erie, which is about an hour north of where they lived. And that was his way of kind of disconnecting from reality and kind
Looks
of
beautiful.
disconnecting from his somewhat crappy life. And so on Friday, March 15th, Larry approached his wife and said, hey, you know, I'd like to head up to Lake Erie and go fishing for the weekend. And she would tell him, you know, I got the kids, it's fine, you can go do that, but I heard the weather was going to be really bad. Are you sure that's such a good idea? And Larry would tell her, you know what, don't worry about it. These storms, they always hype them up. They're never a big deal. I'll be fine. And so he kissed his wife, he kissed his kids, he grabbed his stuff, he hopped in his truck,
Famous
and
last
he left
words.
and headed up to Lake Erie. That night, Lake Erie was hit with a massive thunderstorm, way bigger than the one that the news was predicting. And then the following morning, the Coast Guard discovered Larry's boat floating around on Lake Erie. There was minor damage to it, and it was missing an oar, and it was missing Larry. Larry was nowhere to be found. And so a search was launched for Larry, but he was never found, and he was eventually declared dead. And so even though the family did not have Larry's body, they would hold a funeral for him, and his wife was able to actually cash his life insurance policy, which was enough to pay for her and the kids.
Is that Akron,
8 years
Ohio
later,
behind him?
In 1965, Larry Bader's niece, a 21-year-old woman named Suzanne Peka,
Funny.
was in Chicago at a sporting goods show with a friend of hers. And as they're walking through the different exhibits, looking at different sporting goods equipment, they noticed over on the side of the building, there was a fairly large group of people gathered around this one particular exhibit. And so she and her friend she was with walked over to this group, and they kind of pushed their way through. And in the middle of this group was this man with an eye patch and a big mustache doing an archery demonstration. Basically, he was shooting arrows into a target about 30 feet away. And so Suzanne and her friend just kind of watched this guy for a couple of minutes, and very quickly they could see why he
Mr.
was
Ballin
attracting
looks like
this
way
big
less
crowd,
evil than
because
Donut
he was just
Operator.
an incredible archer. He was hitting the bullseye
I don't know how to
over
explain
and
it.
over and over again. But as they continued to watch this guy, Suzanne's friend started to notice something unique about him. And he eventually turned to Suzanne and said, hey, doesn't this guy look exactly like your uncle who went missing on Lake Erie? And Suzanne was kind of surprised to hear him talking about her missing uncle, but she turned and looked at this guy, and all of a sudden she saw it too. He was a spitting image of Larry Bader, her uncle, although this guy had an eye patch and a mustache, but even with that, he looked exactly like Larry. And as Suzanne is watching him, she's thinking, you know, Larry was known for being this incredible archer, and here this guy is who looks just like him, and he's an incredible archer.
Just
And
like
so after this
randomly?
demonstration was over, Suzanne and the friend ran over to this guy with the eye patch on, and Suzanne says to him, hey, I know this sounds totally crazy, but you look exactly like my uncle, Larry Bader, who went missing on Lake Erie 8 years ago. And so the guy, he hears her and he kind of smiles and says, you know, I'm sorry, I don't know Larry Bader. My name is John Johnson. People call me Fritz.
John
I'm
Johnson.
sorry, I don't know who your uncle is. I can't help you. But Suzanne, as she stood there staring at this guy, she was becoming more and more convinced this was Larry Bader, despite the fact this guy is saying he is not Larry Bader. And so she says to him, no, you are Larry Bader. I'm positive you're my uncle. Now at this, Fritz would be polite but firm, and he would reiterate that, look, I'm not your uncle. I don't know who
John
Larry
Johnson.
Bader is. I don't go to Lake Erie. I just don't understand why you think I'm him. I live in Omaha, Nebraska with my wife and my kids, and I'm on TV. I do sports journalism in Omaha, and I advise archery companies, and that's why I'm here. So I don't know why you think I'm your uncle, but I'm not. I'm sorry. And with that, Fritz turned around and he walked away. And after this discussion, Suzanne and her friend were not remotely deterred from what Fritz was saying.
Oh,
They
yeah,
were
definitely.
completely convinced this
I think
was Larry
he looks
Bader.
like a
And so they
villain
ran
from
to
an
a
action
phone,
movie.
and Suzanne
Mr. Ballin looks
called
like the
her
good
two
guy.
other uncles, so Larry Bader's brothers, and she explained how she met this guy that is the spitting image of their brother, and they immediately hopped on a flight that night and flew to Chicago, and the following morning, the two uncles, along with Suzanne and her friend, they went back to the sporting goods show. They went over to the archery exhibit, and sure enough, there was Fritz doing his archery demonstration. And as soon as there was a break, Suzanne, her friend, and now the two uncles, so Larry Bader's brothers, they walk over, and the two uncles, as soon as they see this guy, despite the eye patch, despite the mustache, they too would say, this is our brother. And so they approached him and they said, look, I know you're saying you are not our brother. I don't know what's going on here, but you look exactly like our brother. And we have his military paperwork right here with fingerprints. Will you please just humor us and go to the police station with us and get fingerprinted? That way you can prove you really are not our brother. Please, we've been looking for our brother for a long time. This would be a huge favor to us. And so Fritz was annoyed. He didn't want to do it, but he's like, okay, fine. I'll go to the police station with you. I'll get my fingerprints taken and we can put
Yeah,
this behind
exactly.
us. And so that day they left the sporting
That's a good way
goods
of
show.
putting
They
it.
went to a police station and Fritz had his fingerprints taken. And afterwards, the police would tell him, you are Larry Bader. When Fritz heard this, he
are
could not believe
the
it.
father.
I mean, he literally did not believe he was Larry Bader. It wasn't like this revelation prompted new memories and suddenly he recalled it all. It was really the opposite. Fritz immediately is trying to rack his brain to figure out, like, is my whole life a lie? But there was nothing. All he had was a contiguous stretch of memories from when he was a very young child as Fritz Johnson all the way to the present. But we now know that the bulk of his memories are all not real. He was never a child as Fritz Johnson. He was Larry Bader and then became Fritz Johnson only 8 years earlier. The timeline of what happened to Larry Bader is rough at best. But as far as we understand it, Fritz Johnson showed up in Omaha, Nebraska a couple of days or a couple of months after Larry Bader went missing on Lake Erie. And when Fritz showed up in Omaha,
I mean, there's a
he
couple
just
of different
walked
things that
into
could
a
have happened.
restaurant and asked for a job
Like,
there.
one,
and
it
he
could have been
provided documentation
legit,
that showed he was in fact Fritz Johnson.
some kind of, you
and
know,
nobody
fugue
thought
state,
anything of it. He
or
was
could have been
completely
him
normal. There was nothing unusual about his behavior.
like
and over
trying to
time,
ditch
Fritz
his
just
family.
kind of thread himself into the Omaha community. I mean, he got married, he had a child, he adopted another child, he left his job as a bartender at a restaurant and eventually got this amazing job as a sports TV broadcaster for their local channel. I mean, he was like a minor celebrity in Omaha. Everybody
Yeah, if he
recognized,
didn't have a good
there's Fritz
life,
Johnson.
that's kind
He's
of a
on
weird
TV.
detail,
Hey,
right?
Fritz, how you doing? I mean, he had a full-blown
Exactly. Where did he get the
life. But as soon
documentation?
as the news broke that he was not Fritz Johnson, he was Larry Bader, right away, the TV station he worked for fired him. His second wife left him because in
Or
reality,
a
he
guy
actually
trying
was
to pass it
still
off as,
legally married
I don't
to
know what you're
his
talking
first
about.
wife.
Maybe he would
And so
go to the
his
police
marriage
station.
to his second wife was never actually real to begin with. And so she leaves him. And then also because Larry Bader
Maybe that was
was
just
no
part of the
longer
ploy.
dead, the insurance company that had paid out all that money to his first wife as part of his life insurance policy, they demanded that he repay them. And throughout all this drama of Fritz finding out he's Larry Bader,
That's
Fritz
crazy.
continued to say he was not Larry Bader, that this was all a big mistake. He just could not understand how this could have happened. None of it made sense. And so eventually a team of experts, doctors, psychologists, you name it, they came out to Omaha and they ran Fritz, aka Larry Bader, through a battery of tests over almost 2 weeks. And at the end of all their testing, they concluded that one, Fritz definitely is Larry Bader. So there's no debate there. He is Larry Larry Bader. And 2, he is almost certainly suffering from an extreme case of amnesia, which is memory loss. But the doctors and experts had no idea how he developed this case of amnesia. And of course, Fritz, he too had no idea how he developed this case of amnesia. And it's unlikely we'll ever get any more clarity on exactly what happened to Larry Bader / Fritz, because unfortunately, just 1 year after it was discovered Fritz was Larry Bader, Fritz would die. He had cancer in one of his eyes, and that was actually why he wore
only
that
40.
eye patch, and the cancer had come back and it took his life. Today, his case is considered to be one of the most believable and baffling cases of amnesia on record.
That's crazy.
Before we get into our next story, I want to talk to you about...
The next story is actually really sad. I don't want to even watch it on stream. I was actually like, Jesus fucking Christ. You know what that story kind of reminds me of a little bit? Just a little tiny bit. You ever see the Changeling movie with Angelina Jolie? But that's based on like a real thing that happens. What's like the kid that went missing, and then like the police were like, no, this is your kid, and it wasn't their kid or whatever. The fuck is that called? That's kind of what that reminds me of a little bit. It feels like stuff like that could happen so often back in the day too, with like records not being as good and stuff. Like people could like slip through the cracks so easily. I guess people still could if you think about it. Bobby something. Yeah, that is a really interesting story. Like someone like being told so many times that they are someone, like eventually like maybe believing it. Hey, there's a new Barely Sociable. I haven't watched this. I really like this channel. Pretty long one, but the cryptic last word sent from the world famous yacht.
Today's video is brought to you by Audible. Now, if there's something that I've
I really
started
like
to do more
Barely
and more when
Sociable.
it comes to making videos online, it's that I've started to make more of an effort to write the script for my video in a way that you don't miss any key details just by listening. And based on this poll I did a while back, about 69% of you prefer to listen to videos over watching them. And if you're someone who likes consuming content in this way, then you'll probably like today's sponsor, Audible, the go-to service when it comes to audiobooks. With the Audible Plus catalog containing thousands of audiobooks, exclusive Audible excerpt was written by Harold William Tillman, a legendary explorer who led an expedition to Heard Island in 1964.
You think we'll ever just get to the point where everyone has Audible that wants Audible?
10 minutes south, longitude 73 degrees, 35 minutes east.
I love this kind of
is
shit.
an uninhabited subantarctic island lying about 300
like
miles
weird
to the
islands and
southeast
stuff.
of the much larger
Like uninhabited
island
weird
Kerguelen.
islands.
Measuring only some 23 miles by 12 miles, it culminates in the peak known as Big Ben, which is 9,005 feet high.
Big
Thus,
Ben?
the island is nearly all
Bad Ben, the
mountain, a mountain heavily glaciated on all sides. Many of the glaciers terminate in ice cliffs that are washed by the sea. As far back as 1957, I had had an eye to Big Ben, but inquiries shown that there was no safe anchorage where mischief could be left. A letter too from
like Barely
Mr.
Sociable.
P.G. Law, then and now director of the Australian Antarctic
I like
Division,
that like
had
kind
been
of crew
discouraging.
of spooky
As
guys.
regards your getting to
Nexpo,
Heard
Barely
Island,
Sociable, and
he had written,
like
I cannot overstress the
other
dangers
ones.
which
They're
will
all pretty
face
good.
you if you proceed in a small boat. As you know, Heard Island is right in the track of the Great Westerly Cyclones,
I like his in
which sweep
particular, though. I
across
like
the
the
Southern
stuff he
Ocean,
does.
with almost no intervening period of good weather of any duration. The seas are mountainous, and altogether I can think of no worse place to sail a small craft. Now, Tillman would captain a ship called the Patinella for this particular expedition. While Mischief was his usual ship, he didn't dare take it to this place. And due to his efforts, they were later successful in reaching the summit of this remote and desolate place. As a result of this being the first time that Big Ben had been summited, it was an achievement heard across the globe. But
Bad
what nobody
Ben.
knew at the time was that Tillman would later disappear at sea some 13 years later, with not a trace of him being found since. At the age of 79, he had been attempting to lead a similar world-first expedition to Mount Foster in the Antarctic. But after the ship had left port in Rio de Janeiro, what followed was an eerie
Wendigoon's
silence,
popping up
as
everywhere
the man
right
who
now.
had spent his entire life cheating death had seemingly finally had his time. Between fighting in both world wars, including the First Battle of Somme, and earning medals for bravery each time, to setting world records for exploration and mountain climbing, until he eventually became a world-class
I don't think I've ever heard
celestial
of that.
navigator. And it's safe to say
What are
Harold
they,
William
covers?
Tillman
Same
was
stuff?
truly an extraordinary man with a death wish. While you might wonder what would drive
He
a
looks
man
like
to
a
spend the
badass.
entirety of his life on these types of excursions, in a few remarks about the war after the fact, he stated that he was often questioning why he was the one who had survived. And as a result of not wanting to be left alone with his thoughts, he could never fully adjust to a mundane life. As a result, this led to Tillman being a part of some of the earliest recon trips to the Himalayas for mountaineering.
Was he on
And
his
for a
face
time,
just
he
like a
even held the
mask?
world record for the tallest mountain summited, that being Nanda Devi in the 1930s. Additionally,
virus
he's
stuff,
even
interesting.
responsible for scouting the route that would later become the standard approach for
You know what?
Everest.
That reminds me.
And that all being said,
Off topic a little bit. I heard a weird story the other day. I'm trying to think of where I heard it. It was in some, I think it might have been an iceberg video about weird internet stuff. About someone who thought they had a computer virus that was like, the virus was God or something like that. The virus thought it was God.
said the Mount Hurt expedition
weird
was just
story.
a final footnote on his extensive list of achievements. And had it not been for the Patinella, this world achievement would have likely never occurred. Because even for a man as fearless as Tillman, even he knew better than to take his ship Mischief on the journey.
Unlike some
And
fucking
when he
anime.
asked if Patinella was a worthy vessel, he immediately reconsidered. For just like Harold Tillman had cheated death, the Patinella had also gained a reputation for cheating death as well. In 1954, the vessel had also been used for crayfishing, and on one particular day, the
Did
boat
he
got
really?
into
I
a bit of
didn't
trouble
see that
and
one.
ended up gashing a major hole in its hull. Now, this boat had been equipped with a watertight bulkhead, which in turn managed to confine the water to only a certain part of the hull, preventing it from sinking.
Huh.
Miraculously, the boat had managed to make it back to the port unaided after spending 14 hours at sea. As a result, the Patinella had gained a reputation as an incredibly durable 63-foot steel-hulled ship that would be chartered for multiple voyages to all parts of the globe. Thus, this ended up making the Patinella a piece of history, not only for this world first, but also in
Pretty
Harold
sick.
Tillman's often forgotten legacy. But unbeknownst to everyone at the time, the Patinella would later come to have another thing in common with Harold Tillman over 24 years later.
Hell yeah, dude. This intro's sick.
Now, as time would progress, the Patinella would seemingly not be able to continue a mundane life
Yeah,
either,
sounds good.
as the boat had continued to pop up in newspapers over the years. In the 1970s, a man by the name of Norm Hunt had his own set of adventures with the Patinella, where in a around-the-world journey, he had eventually been iced in at Greenland Harbor. After spending days dodging icebergs, they eventually made it out unscathed. Additionally, on another voyage to Kenya during this time, the ship had been left unattended for less than half of an hour. After they returned back to the ship, they had found that the ship had been ransacked. And while it's definitely surprising just how many times this tiny ship had made headlines, we're really only getting started going into the 80s. Because that's when the story of the Patinella would really take a bizarre turn. That being in 1988, when after being passed down from owner to owner, the ship had eventually been purchased by a wealthy businessman from Perth by the name of Alan Nicol. At the time, the ship was valued at about $500,000. And after being purchased, this is when Patinella's final known journey would begin. On the 16th of October, 1988, the goal was a month-long voyage where they were to set out from Fremantle Harbour for Airlie Beach in Australia, where Nicol planned to vacation in the Whitsundays with his wife and their 2 children. The boat was also scheduled to work as a charter vessel thereafter.
Aha.
As the journey began, the boat had a crew of 6. On board was the schooner's owner, who we already discussed, his skipper, Ken Jones, a 52-year-old distinguished sailor, his wife, Noreen Jones, their daughter, Rona Lee Jones, and 2 young sailors, 23-year-old John Blissett and 21-year-old Michael Calvin. Blissett and Calvin were new to the boat, and they first started working for Alan after they both struck up a conversation with him at Fremantle before the journey started. Both of the young men explained that they were looking to gain sailing hours that they could add towards their navigational certificates. Additionally, they agreed that they could work as crewmen for the boat's charter business when they arrived at Airlie Beach. As a result, Nickel hired them. And as the first portion of the journey began, it was all smooth sailing. But on October 29th, both Rona Lee Jones and Alan Nickel had got off the boat at Port Lincoln for other work-related commitments. This is only temporary for Alan though, and he planned on getting back on the boat in Sydney on November 8th, where he would get back on the boat and continue to Airlie Beach to meet his family. But little did Alan and Rona Lee know that at the time they were getting off the boat at Port Lincoln, it would be the last time they saw Patinella ever again. As a result, this left 4 people on board: Ken Jones, his wife Noreen, and the 2 new crewmen, John Blissett and Michael Calvin. A few days after Alan was dropped off, on November 4th,
I like the
Alan received a radio call from the skipper who claimed the boat was docked in Portland and that they needed money for fuel. While the money was later wired to Ken, he later withdrew it, but it's unclear if he actually purchased fuel that day. The next day, on November 5th, Michael Calvin's father had received a surprise call from his son. On the line, he said, "Good day, Dad." But after this, the line went dead. On that same day, Jones radioed Wilson's Promontory, where he gave a positional update. He would do the same thing on November 6th as they passed Bega. On November 7th, Patinella was spotted by a lighthouse keeper at Point Perpendicular. And as the sun set on the 7th and led into the 8th, at 1 a.m., a radio operator at Overseas Telecommunication Commission received a call from Ken Jones. He stated that Patinella was currently 10 nautical miles east from Botany Bay in Sydney. He would go on to say, "I believe we've run out of fuel. We've hoisted our sails, and we're tacking out to the east. Tacking out about 080. Our intention is to tack out for a couple hours, then tack back in.
Next boat does a lot of this.
We may need some assistance in the morning to get back into Sydney Harbor." Now, this transmission was noted to be odd by the family members for a couple of reasons. For one, Ken Jones' son had this to say after he listened to it. "It's certainly my father's voice in the tape, but it doesn't seem to be his words. I don't think he'd ever say he believed that he was out of fuel. He was too experienced to be so vague. I think his radio calls were veiled calls for help." Additionally, Alan Nickel stated that the Patinella would not have been short of fuel, as the 3,500-liter fuel tanks were filled to capacity at the start of the voyage, and additional diesel had been added at stops along the way. But the oddities don't end there. About an hour later, Ken called back and requested directions to the town of Maruya, which was 300 kilometers south. The operator provided the directions, but Ken soon called back again a few minutes later. This time, there was a lot of static on the line, and the only words that could be deciphered were 300 kilometers south? Is it south?
Excuse me. I keep forgetting I'm not muted when I clear my throat like that.
This would be the last known communication from Patinella. Assuming they ran into trouble at night while sailing, it's worth pointing out that the boat had been equipped with an emergency position indicating radio beacon. Had some issue occurred on board, they would have been able to send a distress frequency to any passing aircraft overhead for 48 hours. Now, these beacons can either be activated manually or automatically if submerged in water, but no such signal seems to have been sent. Despite Ken failing to arrive at Sydney the next morning, on the
pirates
8th,
maybe.
Nickel didn't report the boat missing. But I should clarify that he did not know about the transmission from the night before, and whatever reasoning Ken had for asking for directions to Maruya, that remains unclear. After the Patinella's last correspondence, it wouldn't be until 11 days later that the boat was actually reported missing. That was when the Patinella had failed to reach Airlie Beach on the 18th. At that time, Peter Jones, the son of the skipper, attempted to reach his father on that day. After multiple attempts to reach his father, he subsequently went to the authorities. But the authorities refused to launch a full-scale search. The Patinella case was plunged into controversy when the Federal Sea Safety and Surveillance Center in Canberra refused to launch a full-scale search for the yacht. The center said it had been notified 11 days after the yacht went missing, and that any proper search would have to cover an impossible 200,000 square kilometers of ocean. Now, after a 3-year investigation from the Australian government, they later declared in 1992 that the boat had simply sunk on that same night that they radioed into Botany Bay. Now, despite this conclusion, they never elaborated on how the boat sank, leaving that up to interpretation. While the weather definitely wasn't a factor, as the weather was calm that night when the boat disappeared, the investigation instead proposed that the boat was hit by another large freighter and not reported for some reason. This was despite all other 48 vessels in the area that night having been checked for damage to their hull. None of them showed any damage. And it's worth mentioning that the boat was spotted multiple times after this night. Now, the investigation went on to claim that none of these sightings were
the name of a
ever
weed
confirmed.
shop there?
But that
That's
being
fucking
said,
hilarious.
some 6 months after the boat had disappeared, on May
Guess that
9th
makes
of
sense.
1989, fishermen off the coast of Terrigal, about 30
You heard
miles
of the
north
John
of
Maynard
Sydney,
emergency call?
discovered
Dude
a
who had Susan
barnacle-covered
Dream was
buoy.
chilling at it? No?
After the fishermen retrieved it out of the water,
Like
he
he-
found
oh,
that it
like
bore
he
the
got, like, a
name
thing through his head?
Patinella. Now, this buoy was later sent
That you're talking
to
about? I think
Sydney
you may know what
University
you're talking about.
for testing. Marine biologists there concluded that the buoy's growth of barnacles had determined that the buoy had been drifting for no more than 4 weeks, suggesting that the boat was still afloat some months later. But in various other retellings of the stories by officials working on this case, they disregard the 1-month claim and state the following. A life buoy identified as being from the Patinella was recovered from the Sea of Terrigal, New South Wales on the 9th of May, 1989. Marine growth adhering to the life buoy suggested that it may have been in the water for a considerable time, possibly 6 months. Now, there was some debate over this evidence in the investigation, predominantly on the note of the fisherman who had retrieved it out of the water, as he had rinsed off a portion of it to read the word Patinella. But based on the statements made in news reports at the time, marine biologists were also able to determine that the specific type of marine life found present on the life ring was specific to the Coral Sea, where they speculated that the life ring had drifted from a point near Cooktown, Australia.
Cooktown,
On top of
Australia.
that, the boat had been spotted at Rockingham Bay in March and at Fraser Island on June 9th. And interestingly enough, on June 3rd, an unidentified body had been found washed up on Manly Beach, 25 miles from where the buoy was found.
Whose body, though?
The body that washed up on Manly Beach was 175 to 180 centimeters tall. It was believed to be a man between the ages of 20 and 30. However, the body had been so badly decomposed that the person was completely unidentifiable. Additionally, the man was believed to have had a slim build, and when they found him, he only had one leg remaining, with one of his shoes being a shoal size 9. While the police gave a rough estimate of him being at sea for about 4 weeks, keep in mind this is a rough approximation. Because when it comes to estimating a body's decomposition at sea, that's not something that we generally have a lot of data on. And there are a lot of variables when it comes to this process occurring at sea, such as water temperature, animal activity,
Australia has
and
some
other
wild
studies have
names
even
for
pointed to
towns.
things like water oxygen levels being a factor. And to elaborate a bit further on what I'm talking about here, one obvious variable that needs to be factored in is ocean scavengers. Things like sharks, crabs, and small fish will tend to pick apart a body pretty quickly. Depending on the animal activity, there can be a pretty drastic variance in a body's decomposition. And just recently, in another study on body decomposition, scientists found that scavengers would have selective preferences on bodies depending on the dissolved oxygen levels in the water. Additionally, another thing that is very common in bodies retrieved from shipwrecks or diving accidents and other maritime incidents is this thing called adipocere or grave wax. Essentially, adipocere is an incredibly persistent substance that forms from the decomposition of fat cells, ultimately leading to a preservational effect on the body. For example, in 2011, after a couple nearby earthquakes in Switzerland, A body was found floating in Lake Brienz. The
Some of those
investigation
stories
estimated
scare
the
me
body
about,
was
like,
as
people
fresh as
getting
6 months
so
old.
injured,
But
though.
as it turned out, Adipocere ended up creating
make
a
me,
massive
like,
cocoon on the
worry
torso of the
in
body,
real life sometimes
and
when I
x-rays
think
later
about it.
showed that it had preserved much of the internal portions of the man, including his heart, stomach, and other structures. They later examined cherry pits found in his stomach, as well as some bone collagen from the cadaver. After further analysis, radiocarbon dating placed the man's death at 300 years. But that being said, Adipocere's development isn't fully understood. And to quote this paper from the Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine, while several studies have been performed on the nature, the formation, and the degradation of Adipocere, there's still no reliable model to assess the post-mortem interval of a body exhibiting it. But to put it simply, the ocean is still a mystery in many ways, and it's difficult to take this 4-week figure at face value without any kind of reasoning. Given this detail, who's to say that it wasn't 7 weeks to match the time frame of the buoy, or 7 months to match the night the Patinella disappeared? We truly don't know. But that being said, when push came to shove, this body seemed to line up closest with one of the missing crew members, Michael Calvin, and as such, police requested his dental records. Presumably, it wasn't a match though. I say presumably because there seems to be no further statement given on the matter. And besides a couple articles in local newspapers at the time, there isn't a single mention of this body in any other literature on this case. And when I say there's not a single mention of this body later on, not in regards to this case or any other case either. Searching for further information about a body that washed up at this particular location and time only ever yields these details. And given the findings of the marine biologists and the sightings that placed the Patinella in the area, all of these details seem to suggest that the Patinella was still afloat, perhaps hijacked with a new crew. Considering the aforementioned and assuming the two things were connected, it seems that one theory that could be proposed here was that there was some other emergency on the Patinella, ultimately leading to the deployment of the life buoy. One thing that seems to suggest this was a statement given by Alan Nickel at the time. When asked about the life ring, he stated that this wasn't just some object that would have fallen off the boat. It was located in a position that required manual detachment. But all that being said, there's also a chance that this body is perhaps related to something else entirely. But as far as the official record goes, whoever washed up on Manly Beach June 3rd, 1989, that remains unknown.
Massively unknown.
Now, as the investigation continued, more and more sightings continued to occur across the globe, with the most common being along the Australian coast. Additionally, several other sightings were reported around Thailand and Southeast Asia, and one sighting even made it as far as South America. And all things considered, despite no distress signal being sent from the Patinella, with no debris of any kind being found, with no damage to any other boats in the area, the Australian investigation still concluded that the boat had to have sank on the same night.
Yeah, what's Smart McCoy? Thank you for that.
And
sub,
not only
dude.
did they
Appreciate
conclude
that.
this with a lack of evidence, they concluded this while dismissing other valid evidence at the time. Instead of addressing the marine biologist's findings, they were later misrepresented at a later date without any kind of clarification. And don't even get me started on
this
that
isn't
body,
as crazy
which is
as I
such an
thought it would be,
obscure
but it's still
detail
pretty
that is yet to
interesting.
reach the light of day in any other discussion of this case. To put it simply, you'd think that if they were so certain the Patinella had sunk on the same night without any kind of hijacking or other crime taking place, the Australian investigation could prove it by searching a very specific area 10 miles off the coastline. But as far as I'm aware, no attempt was made to prove the investigation's theory. And to put it simply, the hit and run theory they proposed was a stretch, and I haven't even brought up the fact that the Patinella had received $40,000 worth of upgrades after going under new ownership. Included in those upgrades was a new radar system that would alert them to any nearby vessels, which would have made it next to impossible that they could have been a victim of a hit and run. Even if we factor in any kind of other disaster occurring on that same night, the fact that no debris was found the next morning leaves you with no reason to believe the boat had sank the night before. So all in all, a highly durable ship capable of sailing to any place on the planet, known for facing some of the world's toughest conditions, persevering through icebergs for days on end, that had just been upgraded with some of the best navigation and safety equipment money could buy, simply
I mean,
sank
anything
without
can
any
go wrong.
evidence, and the case was closed according to the professionals. Naturally, you have to ask what the hell was going on with this investigation. And to take a closer look at how the investigation
Especially
ran
on a
its
boat.
course, let's begin
Like,
with
so much
Alan
shit can
Nichols'
go bad so
actions
quickly.
after the Patinella disappeared. If you recall, Mr. Alan Nichol never reported the boat missing. This detail is incredibly strange. Alan was due to be picked up on the 8th, but for some reason, he presumed that they had continued on without him. Despite some 11 days passing with no further correspondence, this still wasn't enough for him to say anything. And this makes it appear that perhaps some factor was preventing Nichol from going to the authorities. It's possible, but it's also possible that Nichol was also distracted by his day-to-day. Regardless of this strange detail, Nichol definitely seemed concerned about the boat's disappearance, and he seems to have been very proactive in the search for the boat, because in the following months he went on to spend some $30,000, where he basically financed his own investigation and went to great lengths to interview people who had seen the ship. And most notably, after the Patinella had disappeared, he had made several allegations to Western Australian police. To start his list of suspicions, he suspected the skipper to have played some role in hijacking the boat based on previous business failures. But no further elaboration is given on this detail in later reports. The only thing that does even slightly seem to suggest this possibility was the final transmission. Ken Jones randomly asking for directions to Maria, that does definitely seem to point to some suspicious behavior. But it's also plausible that Ken could have been acting under duress, and like Ken Jones' son said, perhaps his final conversation was in fact a thinly veiled call for help. Now, perhaps the most bizarre allegation by Nichol was that he suggested that the previous owners of the boat were aggrieved of its sale and plotted to get the boat back. He claimed that he was ripped off. And while the police investigated this point, I couldn't find any other details that would corroborate this at all. Getting back to the crew, though, further allegations were made at John Blissett and Michael Calvin. This one seemed to be a bit more plausible, though. In hindsight, he didn't know them very well. They were the only variable for this trip, and it also seemed suspicious that the two boys apparently admired the Patinella so much, it led them to ask for a job on the boat. At the time this case was being investigated, it definitely seemed plausible, but some 2 decades later, on New Year's Day 2008, a woman combing a secluded beach near the town
That's
of
pretty
Eucla
fucking far away.
had found a message in a bottle from John Blissett. It was dated October 26th, 1988. It read, "Hi there, out there on the lonely Southern Ocean, and thought we would give away a free holiday in the Whitsunday Islands in North Queensland, Australia. Our ship is traveling from Fremantle, Western Australia, to Queensland to work as a charter vessel." It gave the Patinella's position as 34 degrees 24 minutes 20 seconds south, 129 degrees 18 minutes 54 seconds east. Additionally, it included a number for people to call to claim their prize, and he signed off saying, "See you soon, Jono." Now, ultimately, this note seems to suggest that the two boys were interested in going on an adventure, as this entire thing seems incredibly lighthearted. Presuming that they planned on doing something malicious in the coming days, this seems completely out of character. Now, moving on to the final allegation made by Nichol. That was that he suspected that the boat was hijacked by persons involved with trafficking narcotics. Based on his own investigation, which led him to interviewing various people who had spotted the ship, he had learned that the boat wouldn't stop into town for fuel or supplies. The ship was almost exclusively spotted around open water, and on the rare occasion that Patinella did dock into shore, it would only go to remote areas that were accessible by four-wheel drive vehicles. If we consider the strange behavior from Ken that night, with no emergency transmission, along with the later sightings of the boat placing it in Thailand, this theory, while reliant on eyewitness testimony, does seem to have some plausibility. While it is worth noting that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, the Patinella was a pretty distinct ship given its older design. Assuming the sightings around Thailand
the Australian Prime Minister
placed the boat
vanished.
along a known trafficking route out of the Golden Triangle. Additionally, had
I have
this
to
been
look
the
up
case,
more about
this
that
could
story.
also
I forgot
account
about
for the
that.
buoy
I've been watching a lot of
drifting
Unsolved
from some
Mysteries
remote
lately
part of the
too.
Coral Sea. Additionally, the boat
Those
would
are
have been
free on
refitted to disguise its
YouTube.
look and then
So I've
re-registered
been hearing a lot
in
of
different
old
country
mysteries
by bribing separate officials.
I
On
forgot
top of
about
all
or
of
haven't heard
that,
of
given the nature of
before.
what business we would be potentially dealing with this case, this can also account for some potential corruption in the investigation, which could explain the poor conclusion given by the investigation.
And Joe.
But getting back to that investigation, let's take another look at how that all went down. Because after Nickel raised suspicions about a further crime and reported his allegations, from here there was apparently some internal struggle over who was responsible for the case, and as a result of bureaucratic issues, no work was done on this case for months. The investigation was later escalated from the Federal Sea Safety Centre in Canberra to the Australian Federal Police, and in February of 1989, they finally assigned Detective Superintendent Ed Tyree to be in charge of the case, with him being an advisor to who had the final say in the case, that being the state coroner Derek Hand. Now, in Australia, the coroner's role is a bit different. It's not a medical position.
I like good
Instead, it's an appointed
disappearances that,
judicial
border on,
officer
being,
with the legal
paranormal
job to
almost.
investigate the cause of deaths, report
Stuff
them.
that
And it just so happens that
leans
this
to
isn't the
paranormal,
only
but isn't-
questionable
is really
conclusion
interesting.
given by Mr. Derek Hand. And just recently, in 2019, the Australian police announced that they would be reopening one of his cases from this time. A case that has some similar circumstances to what we're talking about. That being the case of Robbie Joe Coulter, a 17-year-old teen who lived in Mildura. After Robbie had left a New
Isn't that
Year's
a town
party
in
in the early
Zomboid?
hours of the morning, he had last been seen walking along the side of a road. He never made it back that night. 2 days later, on January 3rd, 1989, Robbie's body would be found in a nearby river. His body had been weighed down with 21-kilogram mill bricks. His hands were found bound behind his back with bolts to secure them.
That's fucked up.
According to local news reports at the time, Robbie Joe's family suspected he had been a victim of a mafia-style drug-related execution. And stepfather Linton Coulter revealed Robbie Joe had told him he feared narcotics dealers were out to get him after he had witnessed a drug drop 2 months earlier. Do you want to know what Derek Hand had to say about this particular case? He stated that he was, quote, quite satisfied that Coulter was not murdered.
What?
To
Yeah,
add
Robert
insult to
Stack's the
injury,
best.
Mr. Derek Hand ruled that Robbie had taken his own life instead. Another unpopular theory, with one publication stating, the coroner made an open finding nobody, not least his mother and stepfather, agreed. And additionally, this would call into question the entirety of the police working alongside Mr. Derek Hand, as the police
I guess
instead
the
discredited the
police were
elephant
in
in the
on it.
room and insisted that there was some practical joke that could have gone wrong.
They were in the drug dealer's
Once
pocket.
again, they had no evidence to suggest this. Reportedly, the party was not a wild one. Robbie wasn't intoxicated. And additionally, it appeared that Robbie had made it back to his apartment thereafter. I should go on to state Robbie's family has been waiting 30 years for answers on this particular case. They had been asking every single year for the case to be reopened. And all that being considered, the same person who was responsible for this case is the same person who had the final say in the Patinella case. Now, it just so happens that Ed Tyree later found nothing and claimed these allegations made by Nickel were without apparent substance. He would later go on to give the statement, inquiries into various allegations insinuating that Patinella was afloat and involved in criminal activities are unable to be substantiated. This idea was discredited so much by Tyree's investigation that they seemed to fire accusations back at Nickel. And I kid you not, they went as far as to suggest that he had reported criminal suspicions as a way of dealing with, quote, perceived inactivity on the part of various agencies, both Commonwealth and state, to search for the Patinella. Now, ultimately, Ed Tyree and Derek Hand's investigation led to this hit-and-run theory, which makes absolutely no sense. But I should mention that not all of the members of the AFP had the same opinions. And when the life buoy was found, another detective superintendent by the name of Dave Lewington of the AFP National Criminal Investigation Branch, he went on to say the buoy supported the theory that a crime had been committed on the boat. He cited the findings of the marine biologists and a recent oceanographic report, which had confirmed to him that prevailing currents at the time meant the life ring had to have floated from somewhere in the Coral Sea, not the Tasman Sea. And
It's all
perhaps the most
connected.
jarring thing about this investigation was the absolute slap in the face to the families after the fact. The detective
These
working
cops
on this
fucking
case was commended
fucked.
on his work in this investigation by the state coroner, Mr. Derek Hand. Think about that for a second. Derek Hand complimented his detective on finding nothing. If I had to summarize this case, nearly every detail given in news reports at the time seems to conflict with the final statements given by the officials in charge of the investigation. And if you're wondering where I got these final statements, these all come from the Australian Federal Police's own publication in an article
Platypus
on the Patinella.
magazine?
While you might expect the most detail to come from an article written by the actual investigation, it was actually the least helpful and perhaps the most vague in regards to this case. And based on referencing every little piece of literature I could find on this case, it portrays a pretty dark and disturbing story. Neither Australian entity bothered to search for the boat after 4 people disappeared. Additionally, their reluctance continued after multiple sightings were made. The investigation never attempted to prove the boat's final resting place, despite claiming it was only 10 miles offshore from a major city. The investigation's conclusion contradicts multiple pieces of scientific evidence without any clarification, so much so that comments by their peers at the time have blatant contradictions. The investigation accused a victim of making false accusations, claiming he didn't actually believe them. But from other sources, we learn he spent $30,000 of his own money to search for the boat. The investigation claimed that every single sighting of the world-famous bright yellow ship was not verifiable. But when you dig up some of the news reports at the time, the sightings not only match certain time frames of other key details, they also seem to have a specific behavior, as Nickel noted. And perhaps the most interesting discrepancy was that the investigation had Michael Calvin's dental records tested on a body that washed up within close proximity and time frame to the only known piece of patinella. While one police spokesman stated that nothing had indicated that it could have been a crewman from Patinella, their actions were completely contradictory, as it was reported that they had requested these specific records only. And with the results due in subsequent days, there was no further statement on this matter. Furthermore, it only makes sense in a situation where 2 corrupt individuals are conspiring together that a coroner would praise a detective for being so persistent at finding nothing. Questionable investigation aside though, wherever the Patinella is today, or what exactly happened to the crew, they are both still mysteries. And ultimately, we're left with more questions than answers. This is Barely Sociable. Have a good day.
That's pretty crazy. The dude really goes all in for these. Love that outro too. There's a link to that video if you want to check out Barely Sociable. All right. I'm exhausted kind of now. I'm going to chill, end the stream a little early. Not too early. It's 4 hours. It's pretty long. So I will be back tomorrow at some point. Probably play some Zomboid. If you want to hang out and watch, I'll be around. If not, we'll see you probably on Sunday. I'm going to do some spooky stuff on Sunday if you want to watch some spooky games. Maybe tomorrow night, probably Sunday night. Check out the YouTube channel. Check out all the things. Check out the Discord and all the other socials, Twitter. Did that not work? Did that wrong? Oh. There it is. And thanks for coming by. And thanks for the sub, Whipsmart. Appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for coming through. If you haven't followed the channel already and you want to see some more, come on by. Usually purveying a bunch of weird stuff late at night, if that's your thing. Although I do stream at other times, so. And gonna be definitely coming up with a schedule for like Saturday night, Sunday night stuff soon. Like a night for It Came From Itch and a night for like a big Jeff TV thing. So that'll be coming out soon. All right. I'll see you guys soon. Take it easy. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Thanks for chilling. And I will see you guys later on. Have a good night, everybody.